which are rooted in the idea of equity and inclusion for all, we need to change the stories that we are telling ourselves. We need to shift our cultural narrative as well. Maybe we need to start thinking of ridiculous futures which we don't think are going to be possible, to really push ourselves out of our comfort zone, challenge all our assumptions and what we know today. And these narratives really have to be rooted in values. I think eventually it all came down to the ideas of what are the values which are driving our vision of the future, and are we drawing those ideas or those values from the notion of extraction, competition, othering, efficiency, to those of collaboration, compassion, nurturing. And I think the music performance that we had in the evening really brought those values to the core when they were talking about rooting it in love, community, ancient wisdom, relationships, which have to be at the core of the work and the leadership that we want to kind of see for today as well. But I think like the one central idea of how do we move towards these futures, what was it about? That one central idea which will help us move towards these preferred futures that we want. Just say it if something's coming to your mind. Stay with the discomfort, yes. Acceptance of change, reimagination, okay. What else? Huh? Working backwards, backcasting. Right. Huh? Futures thinking. The core of it was the idea of unlocking agency, right? And really believing as individuals that we have the agency to bring the change that we want to bring. And then getting intentional about the future we want, and then backcasting from there and not leading with the problems of today. So today we are really going to go deeper into that idea as to what does it mean to really unlock this belief that we have agency, right? No one gives agency to us. We really have to believe that we have it. So today we are going to listen to some of the ideas where people are actually working with young people. They're applying this idea of futures thinking in their work to really move towards preferred futures and see, like today we'll get into the how of it, like how do we make this a reality as well. So hopefully we will have more hope today than anxiety. And we saw a shift happening yesterday as well. In the morning, this is what people had to say, what comes to their mind when they think about the future in the morning, and that's what we had in the evening by the end of the day. Hopefully we'll go deeper into some of those aspects. And with that, I wanted to play one video just as to kind of bring the idea of hope alive for all of us.
A woman is tending to her cattle by the bank of this river. She observes that the sluggish river is blocked by a dune further down. The river doesn't seem to mind the dune too much though, and bends left before proceeding slowly to the sea. But at this very bend is the woman's melon garden that she has wrested from the fields. The bank is fertile, and there could be more land for more melons, but for the river. The woman gets an idea. She collects several grains from the bank and weaves a simple basket. She fills it with sand and mud and places it in the water close to the bank. Most truly, the reeds from the bank have also managed to enmesh themselves inside the baskets. The river fights back, but in doing so it breaks a small chunk from the dune on the right. Finally, even if it's ever so slightly, the river starts to change course. The woman perceives the change, and she wastes no time in consolidating her first gains given by the reeds by planting a few willow branches on this new bank. A couple of them take root and grow, but disaster strikes. The rains arrive. The river floods and wreaks havoc. Branches, trees, and bushes crash the woman's painstakingly constructed bank and damage it. When the water level recedes, she sees that some branches have remained, and so has a tree. The bank is actually growing longer. The woman's daily toil has not been in vain. The river seems a determined and defiant obstacle now. Try as it might, it can't shake the woman's bank and her resolve. So it has no choice but to run down the hurdle that has been present all these years. The dune. It starts chipping away at the dune. The woman adds a basket day by day. The river responds by breaking the dune inch by inch. The day of reckoning arrives. The next rains. Another flood. But this time around, the river vows to take the right path. It plows against the dune and demolishes it. Finally, the barrier is gone. The river surges forward to meet the sea. The river grows to accept the woman's actions, for without her, it couldn't have charted a faster and more efficient course. The river is not angry with her anymore, and its new route leaves behind a fertile patch of land near the woman's bank, the land the woman always wished for. She grows the melons, which become famous for being the tastiest ones ever. One day, the Sultan arrives. He wanted to understand how she had managed to divert the river to claim this patch. The Sultan himself had tried to force the river to change direction by digging a new course, but the river wouldn't relent. The woman explains to the Sultan that she tried to show the river to seek out new possibilities on its own rather than forcing it to change. The Sultan savors the melon and the woman's insight. Upon discovering this nugget of wisdom, he gifts the newly gained land to the woman and her village tax-free.
So the river here is actually a metaphor for the system and how an individual with their consistent sort of persistence can actually change the system and make it sort of seek new directions as well. So we thought we'll start with this video today. And with that, I'd like to sort of invite our first panelist, which is Sheetal from Gujarat. She's a school student in a government school. And with her, I'd like to invite Deepika, who will engage in a conversation, and they are going to talk about what is Sheetal's imagination of the future for herself and her community, which also has a theme of water in it. So Deepika and Sheetal.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2. It's a privilege to be speaking to Sheetal, and we'll begin. So, Sheetal, and I will be speaking in Gujarati, and you would be able to see the translation right behind on the screen. So, Sheetal, તમે તમારા વિશે અને તમારા ગામ વિશે થોડું અમને કહેશો? હા, તમારો પરિચય આપશો થોડું? बैठ के आराम से बताओ.
गुड मॉर्निंग ऑल ऑफ यू.
मॉर्निंग.
आवाज
आ रहा है सबको? ठीक.
મારું નામ શીતલ મકવાણા છે. હું પાણવા ગામમાંથી આવું છું, જે ગુજરાતના સુરેન્દ્રનગર જિલ્લામાં આવેલું છે. અને હું ધોરણ 11માં અભ્યાસ કરું છું મોડેલ સ્કૂલ ભોજવામાં, જે ગુજરાતના અમદાવાદ જિલ્લાના વિરમગામ તાલુકામાં આવેલી છે.
તો શીતલ, તમારા ગામમાં કયા પ્રકારની તકલીફો છે? અને તમે જ્યારે અમે રિસર્ચ કરતા હતા ત્યારે વાત કરી હતી, બરાબર, કે ક્લાઇમેટ ચેન્જના લીધે, એટલે કે જે બધું તમને બદલાતું દેખાય છે, વરસાદ છે, ગરમી છે, બરાબર, તે લીધે તમારા ગામમાં કેવી તકલીફો પડે છે અને એનાથી તમારા ઉપર શું અસર પડે છે?
અમારા ગામમાં પાણીની થોડી વધારે તકલીફ છે. દરરોજ પાણી નથી આવતું. 2-3 દિવસે પાણી આવે છે, અને જો જ્યારે ના આવે ત્યારે અઠવાડિયા સુધી યા તો મહિના સુધી પાણી નથી આવતું. તો પાણીની વધારે તકલીફ છે, અને એની અસર સ્ટુડન્ટ્સ પર અને જો કે વધારે તો સ્ત્રીઓ પર વધારે અસર પડે છે એની, કારણ કે મોટાભાગના ઘરના કામ સ્ત્રીઓ જ કરતી હોય છે. એટલે ઘરનું કામ કરવામાં, પીવાનું પાણી ભરવાનું બધું જ સ્ત્રીઓને કરવું પડે છે, અને અમારે પણ એમની હેલ્પ કરવી પડે છે.
તમે પણ પાણી ભરવા જાઓ છો ત્યારે?
હા.
હા, ઓકે. તો તમે અમને વાત કરી હતી કે આ જે પાણીની અછત થાય છે અને જે દિક્કત થાય છે કે તમારે પાણી ભરવા જવું પડે છે, તો આ વર્ષમાં કેટલા મહિને થાય છે આવું ગામમાં?
વર્ષમાં કદાચ 2-3 મહિના થાય છે.
2-3 મહિના તમને આ દિક્કત પડે છે, બરાબર? તો તમે વાત કરી હતી કે શું થવું જોઈએ જો આ તકલીફ જે છે એને જો આપણે દૂર કરવી હોય તો શું કરવું જોઈએ? તો તમારા વિચાર અમને બધાને તમે કહો કે આના વિશે આપણે શું કરી શકીએ?
મારો એવો વિચાર છે કે પાણીની થોડી વધારે તકલીફ છે, એટલે અમારા ગામમાં એક ટાંકો હોવો જોઈએ. અને એ ટાંકો બનાવવા માટે એક કમિટી હોવી જોઈએ, અને તે કમિટી મેમ્બર્સ છે તે ચૂંટણી દ્વારા ચૂંટવામાં આવશે. અને જે મેમ્બર્સ રાખવામાં આવશે તે હરેક સમુદાયના હશે, જેથી કોઈને એમ ના થાય કે કેમ આ ભેદભાવ છે એમ.
તમે ભેદભાવની વાત કરો છો ને તમે કહો છો કે કમિટીમાં બધા જ લોકો હોવા જોઈએ, બરાબર, જાતિના લોકો હોવા જોઈએ. તો અત્યારે તમારા ગામમાં કૂવા કે કશું છે કે નથી? ક્યાંથી પાણી લાવો છો તમે?
જ્યારે પાણીની અછત ઊભી થાય છે ત્યારે એવું છે, અમારા ગામમાં એક તળાવ છે અને 2 કૂવા પણ છે, જ્યાં અમે પીવાનું પાણી ભરવા જઈએ છીએ. એમાં એવું છે કે 2 કૂવા છે, એક ઓબીસીનો છે અને એક જે બીજો કૂવો છે તે SC/STનો છે. અને અમે લોકો ત્યાં પાણી ભરવા નથી જતા.
ત્યાં પાણી ભરવા જાઓ તો શું થઈ જશે?
ઝઘડા થાય છે.
ઝઘડા થાય છે. અને તમારા કૂવામાં પાણી હોય છે કે નથી હોતું?
હા, અમારા કૂવામાં પાણી હોય છે. અને એમાં એવું છે કે જો અમારા કૂવાને કોઈ નુકસાન થાય કે એવું કાંઈ થાય તો અમારા કૂવાને જલ્દી રિપેરિંગ કામ થતું નથી. પણ જો એ કૂવાનું કંઈક નુકસાન થાય કે ત્યાં કંઈક થાય તો તરત જ રિપેર થઈ જાય છે.
બરાબર. તો હવે આજે તમે સમિતિની વાત કરો છો, પાણીનો ટાંકો કરશો અને સમિતિ બનાવશો, તો આ સમિતિમાં તમે કયા લોકોને ચૂંટીને લાવવા ઈચ્છો છો અને એનાથી શું થઈ જશે જો તમે આવી એક કમિટી બનાવશો, બરાબર, તો એનાથી શું થઈ જવાનું?
કમિટી મેમ્બર્સને પહેલાં તો કે હરેક સમુદાયના હશે અંદર, અને એવા વ્યક્તિઓ હશે કે જે ભેદભાવમાં માનતા ના હોય અને હરેકને સરખા જ ગણતા હોય. અને મારા ખ્યાલથી તો તેમાં સ્ત્રીઓ હોવી બહુ જ જરૂરી છે, કારણ કે સ્ત્રીઓને મોટાભાગે વધારે ખબર હોય છે કે પાણીની ક્યાં કઈ રીતે ઉપયોગ થાય છે, કેટલો તેનો વ્યય કરવો જોઈએ. તો તેમાં સ્ત્રીઓ પણ હોવી જોઈએ.
તમે અમને કહી શકો કે આ સમિતિના બીજા કાર્યો શું હશે? આ સમિતિ બીજું શું કરશે?
તો આ જે કમિટી છે તે પહેલાં તો કે જે ટાંકો છે તેનું પાણી ચોખ્ખું રહે તેનું ધ્યાન રાખશે, અને બધાને સરખું પાણી મળી રહે તેનું પણ ધ્યાન રાખશે. અને જેમ કે ઋતુ પ્રમાણે પાણી હોય એનું પણ ધ્યાન રાખશે. એમાં કોઈ એવી ટેકનોલોજી મૂકવામાં આવશે કે જેથી, જેમ કે શિયાળો હોય તો બધાને ગરમ પાણી મળી રહે, અને ઉનાળો હોય તો બધાને ઠંડુ પાણી મળી રહે, એનું પણ ધ્યાન રાખવામાં આવશે.
વરસાદના પાણીની પણ કોક વાત કરતા હતા, તો વરસાદના પાણીનું શું કરવું જોઈએ?
હા, એમાં એવી સિસ્ટમ પણ રાખવામાં આવશે કે જેથી જ્યારે ચોમાસાની ઋતુ હોય ત્યારે વરસાદનું પાણી પણ સંગ્રહ કરી શકાય અને તે ટાંકામાં ભરી શકાય.
ઓકે, થેન્ક યુ શીતલ. ખૂબ ખૂબ આભાર તમારો. I just want to sum up this conversation with one key concept that comes out for all of us. And yesterday from the same stage, there was a point that was made that, children who are caught in basic survival, can they even think about futures, right? Here we have a young person from a village, and this district which she belongs to is one of the districts in Gujarat which has highest Dalit atrocities actually, Surendranagar. And we have this young person from that community speaking to us. What was created was only the space and opportunity during the time of research. And she's thinking about a future which is based on the core principles of social justice. She's talking about participation of all the communities, representation of all the communities. She's talking about redistribution of the resources and much more in her imagination. So the key concept to futures literacy, what we were talking about unlocking the agency of people, it is not locked in their caste, class, gender, but truly the opportunities and space that they can get to start imagining. And with that, I would like that we have a great and wonderful day. And thank you so much, Sheetal, कि आप इतना बड़ा सोच रहे हैं और आगे का सोच रहे हैं. खूब खूब धन्यवाद. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deepika and Sheetal, for starting off on that note. I think it really grounds us in the idea of, again, what is the kind of future we want? Whose future are we thinking about? How are we thinking about shifting power structures within this future as well? And that's what the next panel is going to be about. And I'd invite Donna, who's the moderator from Digital Futures Lab. We have Sonali Vyas from Safety Pin, we have Nitin from Karya, and we have Arhant from Sustainable Living Lab, and we have Kumar Sambhav from Land Conflict Watch on this panel.
Thanks, Neha, for the introduction. Tough act to follow. It's a very powerful story there right before us. So this is basically, I'll just set the context for the conversation today. Moving in from our talk about futures literacy yesterday, we'll have a bunch of more action-oriented presentations. Our panelists will talk about the work they're doing on how they're leveraging technology for social change to meet the ends of equity and inclusion, how they're leveraging futures literacy for that, and how they're also confronting power structures in their work. So the structure for this panel discussion is where the panelists will talk about their work, And we'll delve a little more deeper into how they're achieving their end goals, and we'll also have some time for Q&A after that. So just start off with Sonali. You can kick off with your presentation.
Hello, good morning. Are you able to hear me? Yeah, great. We are all talking about change, creating change. And one thing that is important to create a change is data. And that's who we are. We are a social impact organization working with wide range of stakeholders on creating, building safer, equitable, and inclusive cities. And we combine technology, community engagement, and data analysis to create a safety database of lived experiences of women, girls, and other vulnerable groups. Our data around the world have been used by city governments to improve infrastructure, be it transport services, and urban systems. We are trying to create systemic change in the cities. And now when we talk about cities, cities are exciting. They are spaces of opportunity, employment, yet poor services, lack of safety, and unresponsive services are preventing equitable access, especially young people. India is a young country, and we have more than 50% population under the age of 25. But are they being represented in urban development decision-making processes? No. That's why we started with this project called Cities for Youth, it is supported by Foundation Patna in Rajasthan, where we are working with young people on including their voices, their experiences in urban planning processes. We started with a question: what impacts their well-being in their cities? We engage with 400 young people coming from diverse group of gender, class, socioeconomic background, ability. And we learned that young people want safety, want rights, want accessibility. And from these conversations, we were able to understand that young people want to live with rights, move without fear, grow with pride, and play without restriction. We have developed a framework that outlines social economic conditions that cities must provide for young people to thrive. And this framework can act as a compass for civil society organizations, for the city government in ensuring how to create youth and gender responsive cities. We then worked with young people in Jaipur and Udaipur cities of Rajasthan, where we worked on 3 levels. First off, we worked on enhancing youth agency, in which our capacity and perspective building training programs actually focused on nurturing their leadership skills, creating spaces where they could shape their futures, and mentoring them on how do they want to take it forward. We also empowered young people to leverage technology to collect data, disseminate it, and present it to share their challenges, their experiences in the city. And we all know creating change requires a broad-based public support and engagement. Young people themselves engage with public to create these public awareness campaigns. And to share some of the technology tools that were used in this project was we used My Safety Pin app to conduct safety audits. Safety audits gives you an assessment of your streets on safety. How safe is my street? That data was collected by young people based on their experiences. They also engage with a lot of public to get the users interviews in the communities where they were working. These 2 data sets were supplemented by SafetyPin's own citywide database on infrastructure. So we created a large geo data point. So these data points were points about where are young people feeling unsafe, where is my light is not working, where the pavements are not there, I don't get my public transport on time. So these data points are geotagged, and that could be easily shared with any GIS platform. So you can see the number of data points that were created, and then it was shared as a map, as presentation, as public advocacy campaign to understand, to take it forward. We, in the communities where young people were working, they worked with other people who were not part of the safety audit exercise, but they also have a say. They may not have a phone, but they can still talk about it. So they talked about the issues that were problematic for them, be it cleanliness, be it lighting, be it the fact that the neighborhood parks were not used by women at all. To share change stories, in Udaipur, young people actually use Swachh Bharat quite a lot. That's a civic app to report complaints on public toilet and cleanliness. And through the conversation, public toilet was a big issue identified by young people. And as you can see, they raised about 70 complaints, and some of them were resolved. And one of them I would like to share was that from their complaint, a door was installed for the female toilet, and that gave them motivation. And they went on to design a street play, and took it to the streets. In Jaipur, young people gathered, they mobilized a group of people from a community where a public park was not being used by girls. They had issues of lighting, and they submitted a petition, and you can see the change. A light was installed, and now the upgradation work is also being undertaken. And we didn't stop it here. The data also need to go to the government. The government also need to know that young people are critical to shape the futures of our city. They need to listen to these young people. And the good news is that government understand this. And in a flagship initiative of Smart City Jaipur, they created a public city-level public event on young people's voice, getting them to become active citizens in the city. We really believe that young people can come together to create a change, and I would like to share a video to talk about it.
मुझे अपने घर जैसा फील होता है शहर में
मतलब जयपुर एक ब्यूटीफुल सिटी है जयपुर में जैसे हम थोड़ा जो विलेज साइड जाते हैं अपन जैसे सामान्य या फिर उससे भी थोड़ा आगे तो वो एरिया डेवलप नहीं है वहाँ पे गंदगी वगैरह वो छोटे छोटे
सेफ्टी इश्यूज फॉर गर्ल्स एट नाइट
हाँ जैसे ट्रांसपोर्ट पसंद नहीं है यहाँ का रात के 8 बजे के बाद में यहाँ पे कोई गाड़ी या कुछ भी नहीं मिलता है बस वगैरह और यहाँ की सड़कें पसंद नहीं है मतलब भोपाल चलने के लायक नहीं रहती
so definitely can become better हम सब मिलकर अगर प्रयास करें तो कुछ भी असंभव नहीं है
जैसे हमने एक पार्क चेंज किया है उसमें हमने लाइट वगैरह और उसके सेफ्टी के लिए उसका कचरा वगैरह सब कुछ हमने साथ किया है
as a young generation we have the power of internet we can connect through a lot of people अगर हम अपनी सिटी को बिल्ड करेंगे तो हम अपना फ्यूचर बिल्ड करेंगे
So let us all collaborate to enhance youth agency in becoming active citizens, active participants in shaping the future of our city. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonali. Nitin, if you want to go next.
There are 230 million poor people in India currently living on critical income, and that's highest amongst all communities in the world. To put that into perspective, any one of those people would take 7 generations to reach the mean income of $1,500, which is considered to be the benchmark of lower middle class. At the same time, Tech companies such as Microsoft, Meta, and Google spend hundreds of billions of dollars every year collecting training data to train their AI ML models. Karya bridges this gap by bringing this work to people in rural India. Good morning, my name is Nitin, and I'm here to represent Karya. Let's see how a project at Karya typically works. Our clients or partners come to us with a data need. We take that data need and distribute it to our workers through our platform. The workers complete the work and they're paid for it. Because data has so much value, we're able to pay them 20 times the Indian minimum wage. Not only that, they also retain ownership of this data, which allows them to earn royalties going forward. This is made possible through our platform, which is designed and developed to be inclusive. So one of the ways that happens is it's mobile first. Anyone sitting at home can do data work. It supports rural languages, so they can actually work in their own language. It has chat-based interaction, so it's actually one of the interesting things we've done is leveraged familiar interfaces, so people don't have to learn new interfaces to do this work. And it even works without the internet. So far, we've been able to work with over 35,000 workers who've completed more than 35 million tasks on the platform. And of course, this has been made possible through our collaborations with tech clients, research partners, and even government agencies. This is actually a picture from one of the first few projects we did in Soda, Rajasthan. So that's our co-founders with the community. Coming back to the $1,500 goal, a worker with Karya can reach this goal in under 1 year. So what happens after $1,500? What I talked about is the earn aspect of our platform, which allows people to do valuable data work through just a mobile app. What we plan to pilot this year is the learn aspect, which will allow them to pick up critical skills while doing this data work. So they're actually paid to learn. And finally, we want to build career pathways out of poverty through our platform, which is Karya Grow. Our goal is to reach 100 million rural Indians by the year 2030. And one of the key highlights of this year was to be featured on the cover of Time magazine. And this was a big win for us because it was the title of the cover story was AI by the people for the people, which is central to the idea at Karya. And I'd like to quickly end by reading out a quote by one of our beneficiaries. This is Ramola Didi, who's a construction worker from Rajasthan. So it goes, we are villagers, so most of our work requires heavy lifting, but now I can work from my home as per my routine. It is also really nice that we're teaching computers how to speak Marwadi. Marwadi is a great language, plus it is our language. If everyone is hearing my voice and it is helping spread my language, what can be better than this? What can be bigger motivation than this? Thank you.
Thanks, Nitin. Right on time. Sambhav?
Hi. Thank you, everyone. I think these are wonderful presentations and very inspiring. You're also working directly with the communities, so that's very inspiring. I would like to start with a story. I've been a journalist in my previous stint before I started Land Conflict Watch. And I was working with one of the leading newspapers in Delhi as an investigative reporter. And this is in around 2015 when there was a judgment by the Supreme Court which talked about how these communities in Odisha, there's a hill in Odisha, you must have already heard about it, Niamgiri Hills, which is worshipped by the indigenous people there. And it contains, the hill is made up of bauxite, and there was a mining company which wanted to mine it. So it's like the Indian version of Avatar story where indigenous people were up against a mining giant, right? Now, there's a law in India which allows communities to have agency over what happens over their land. And using this law, these indigenous people, Dongria Kon tribes, they resisted the mining, and they said, no, that can't be mining, we worship this hill. Supreme Court decided in the favor of the communities when the case went to them. But so the court said that communities have the right to decide, and the company and the government has to go to the villages, put the proposal in front of them, and the Gram Sabha, the communities will decide whether they want it or not. And one by one, there were 15 villages, they all said no, and then the fate of the mining project was sealed. But after some time, the state government comes up and files a review petition and says, no, the law does not give the right to the communities to do this. Now, there was a huge thing, because when the hearings were happening, the central government favored the communities because it was the law, but state government coming up and saying, no, this can't happen. Law itself doesn't allow. I filed the story for the newspaper that how this was wrong. And one of the mid-level editors comes to me and says, I don't agree with your story. I said, why? She said two things. He said, look, one, I'm not sure whether you're right in reading this, in interpreting this, this thing. I don't think you're reading it right. Maybe the law does not allow. That was one thing. Second of his argument was, why are we writing about this? Why are we even writing about this? This is something happening in one corner of the country, in one forest, and it has been reported about. Why do we keep going on reporting about this? How does it matter to the our English speaking readership in New Delhi, which is more concerned about metro life and more concerned about politics, economy? How does that matter to them? So that told me three things about how our power structure works. One, there's very superficial understanding of what really communities want, what the law says, how they work, and how our society functions in the people who are actually influencing our national level policies, mid-level editor in a newspaper, in a leading newspaper. Second, there is apathy towards the issues of communities, rural communities, forested communities, and there is a deep-rooted understanding that the urban population, youth, in urban areas, English-speaking crowd would not care about such issues. And third, these are used to perpetuate the injustices that has been carried out to the communities, to poor communities in the past. And I just want to clarify here, don't get me wrong here, what we're talking about is sustainable development where it's inclusive, where everybody's opinion and concerns are taken care of, which is what the law is about and which is what this case was about. So at that point, when with that understanding, I thought there has to be some way to sort of change the status quo, or at least try to change the status quo, right? Now, there are also other trends emerging in our surrounding. One, data journalism is this fancy thing which is like very good data visualization. You have colors, etc., and it talks about some trend, but it doesn't really mean much often when data journalism becomes about data visualization. Second, dashboard thinking. Dashboard thinking is huge in governments, policies, corporations, etc. And you can design a dashboard to make your argument and just make the way and just sort of show what you want to show by just designing a kind of dashboard. So here was the thing. I was like, why let's not build a database of all the land conflicts going on across the country, put together, and show the scale to people and say, look, this concerns everyone. This concerns development, this concerns investments, this concerns policies, and you need to understand what are the underlying cause behind such land conflicts, what is the scale, how many people are affected, how much investment is stuck, and why this investment stuck, and what could be the possible ways of resolving these conflicts. So from there, we started building a network of what we call land conflict watchers, which are spread across the country. These are mostly youth people either working with the communities or researching on the issues of environment, land, policies. And they collect data through a tech platform, which then gets reviewed along with evidence of what's really happening, what on the ground, along with all evidence documents that's reviewed, and then that's put together on the database called Land Conflict Watch. Then this data is used to produce accessible research around what's really happening in the tent. And the idea was that this research should not be just limited to academic circles. It should be more actionable research, which goes out to lay readers, to laymen, to more accessible to public, and so that there is we are able to sort of build empathy and agency for people, for communities which are part of these conflicts. And then we also then work with communicating this data through stories, through several media platforms, in different forms and formats, to be able to sort of give voices to people otherwise who would not, who are just fighting in the corners but are not heard of. So that was the idea behind Land Conflict Watch, and I think with at that point, of course, technology and data collection methodologies evolved over the years as we went along. So I'll stop there, and then we can come back to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ambhav. Aryan?
Hello. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. So, big thank you to all my co-panelists for sharing the amazing work they're doing. I'll just keep it brief, and I'll try to connect something which we have been discussing since yesterday. The idea that futures thinking, futures literacy is going to help us basically generate insight and action on what we can do next. So yesterday we were talking about radical futures, ridiculous futures, right? And sometimes what happens is when you think about that, it becomes very difficult to imagine what things could look like, let's say when we are talking about in 2045. Shakil shared some great insights on how we can go about thinking about those futures. But then the question comes back, what do we do to basically create action from it? So what I want to share over here is that there exists a great opportunity for building a better future, and all of us in the room are basically over here to discuss that and realize that and understand that. And while day one was all about focusing on the foresight on what we can do, we use the second half of day one for generating insights from that foresight, and finally today we are going to translate that into action. And this is what the futurists call as the foresight, insight, action method, right? So I just want to share that before I delve into what we do at Sustainable Living Lab. So we work basically at the intersection of technology, foresight, and community engagement. And the idea is that using these tools at our disposal, we'll be able to empower and create agency in the people and communities around us. And this can only happen when we are involving all the stakeholders involved. So I'll show you an example of the kind of work we have done in India. And this is just an example of showing how foresight has shaped our work over the past years. So one can see that, okay, if you look at this timeline, this involves a lot of different kinds of projects. But one thing which is common is we are trying to solve sustainability challenges which are relevant with respect to the foresight exercises we do internally. And if you look at this, even when sustainability may not have been as big of an issue it is today, we have been trying to create projects, co-develop solutions which address some of those challenges. One of the major areas of work, and this is very critical in today's discussion, especially when we talk about technology, climate change, what AI is going to do, what all is up for there, we need to create an agency, in terms of what the youth, what our current generation can do with AI. And the important part about this is to create skills, to develop skills to, basically have the confidence to navigate in this uncertain world. Sorry. Yeah. So one example of what we have done this year is over a 3-month period, we identified few polytechnics, few ITIs, where we wanted to take our AI skilling program, which was funded by MNC partner. And the idea was to help them use AI in their field of work. So the idea is not to turn them into AI software engineers or developers, but it's more on how they can leverage the power of AI in their present work. So all of us know about the example of, how a lot of people in India didn't really go through broadband internet. They straight away got 4G on their phones. So I believe something similar is happening, where digital literacy is going to get superpowered by AI. So maybe, you're going to have people who are going to be digital literate in an AI world for the first time without really, knowing how it existed without AI. So over here, the key thing, to take away is that across regions, across different geographies, within India, there is power, potential, as we have seen some of our, speakers over here, that we can basically empower them to create change, and that's what I think we want to, disrupt the status quo with.
Thanks, Ariant. We're a little low on time, so what I'm going to do is maybe give each of the panelists 3 minutes for follow-up questions. And as you finish, you can also add what you're hopeful about the future. And so I'll start with you, Sonali, the work you're doing with young folks. What do you think are key enablers or an enabling ecosystem that organizations such as yourself can provide young people to have better agency in what they do?
See, I think the organization, like all of us, we can provide a platform for young people to actually talk about fearlessly about their futures and help them and mentor them in how do we take that voices to the right platforms. For example, SafetyPin has been working at the intersection, trying to create an ecosystem where with civil society organization, with government partner, that how do you bring the voices, what are the young people talking about it, and yes, they are important, so let's take their voice and design the cities for them. After all, they are the future residents of the city. So I think giving them the right tools, giving them the right mentorship and perspective. For, in our projects, we realized the shifts have been how the individuals were able to think from I to we. Like how as a group we can come together, we can think together, we can create together. So that's the enabling ecosystem for me. And to answer your question about the future, I feel the part about future is that the young people, most of them, are now fearless about talking about their points, that this is what I want, this is what I feel we should work on. So that has been a big shift, and that gives me a lot of hope for the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonali. Sambhav, also relating to Sonali's point around like giving perspective and like agency, and you're already working through like a participatory model using data. But what are factors outside of technology? Like you mentioned apathy earlier, and maybe some classes not caring about what's happening on the ground. What are factors outside of technology that influence your work? How are you like confronting challenges in that aspect?
No, I think for any of the solutions that we are looking forward to work, there's several factors play in when we're talking about futuristic scenario. While we do talk about individual efforts and our creativity trying to find solutions, it also is essential that there is an ecosystem that enables such solutions to work. And we've been listening since yesterday that we're talking about values, we're talking about inclusion, we are talking about equitability, equity, and those are very, very, I think, foundational principles of how a society functions, how a democracy functions, how the larger ecosystem functions. And that's I think those components to be aware and be asking for those principles to be in place, transparency, accountability, functional democracy, are I think very important aspects to be able to imagine a good future scenario, right? So that's, I think those are the factors that really matter. Yeah, I think these solutions, if we sort of include those elements in our work as well, like I mean, I come from media background, and we're working at the intersection of research and media now. So when we say we don't have to rely so much on mainstream anymore, there are new, with the emergence of technology, the status quo is breaking, as we are saying. Mainstream is anyway sort of fading away. There is very limited influence of the mainstream media to say, but at the same time, if with the right interventions, we focus on new and emerging media, new and emerging mediums for their right use, I think those interventions can be made. Now there's social media, there's YouTube, there's video, communities, volunteers are coming up and creating their own media platforms, right? The influencers in communities, they are saying I mean, they are reaching out to the audience. And those are the models I think could be very effective. Art forms, various digital art forms could emerge and take shape and sort of break the status quo. Similarly, research doesn't have to be always just shared within the academic communities or library. There could be more actionable research, like the groups you're working with, data with communities, participatory research. So those, I think, models could be influential and effective in the larger policy and socio-economic scenario, I believe.
And additionally, one thing you're hopeful about for the future?
I think that the things that I said, youth, the new generation that is growing in this new disruptive scenario is very adept to thinking of how to use technology well. And that's, I think, a very good hope. Now they are not driven by what has been told to them, but I think it's much more independent thinking in youth, and they see for themselves and they figure out for themselves, especially when it comes to technology and use of technology. So I think that with those values intact and with that value thinking, there would be more and more solutions and more solution providers in future, I believe.
Right. So the youth is being more agile and reflexive, and in this present scenario.
Yeah, more innovative, more agile.
Right. Thanks for that. Arihant, I think related to what Sambhav is saying around reflexivity and this concept of cognitive flexibility, how are you bringing that into your work, especially with relation to futures literacy and at the intersection of tech and sustainability from a much broader perspective of economic sustainability? What are frameworks you are using?
So I think cognitive flexibility is something which is very integral in our piece of work. So usually, when I talk about what work we are doing, most of the responses I get is, okay, how come one organization is doing such varied work? Okay, what is your core, kind of work which you like to do, or what is your core value offering? So cognitive flexibility basically means that, you're able to switch from one task to the other. And I think as we are going into a more volatile world where, change is like quite, I would say, fast-paced, it becomes important for us to reimagine how we are setting up teams, organizations, how we are building agency through our stakeholders, be it our end users, be it, our sponsors, our funders, the team we work with. So I think that part is very critical in terms of how it is coming, through the intersection of technology and sustainability. I would say that largely the conversation so far in the sustainability field has been on an ESG model, environment, social, and governance. I would say that for end users, it sometimes, makes more sense to talk about in terms of ESE, economic also. Because to the average person out there, governance a lot of times does not make a lot of sense. They are more able to relate to, the core economic value which they can unlock through some of these approaches. So that's where I would say, this kind of framework probably makes more sense. I'd just top it off with one last thing that, like I said, it's very difficult to imagine what the future could look like from 40 years, 50 years from now. But there's a saying that the future is already here. It's unevenly distributed across the present. So all we need to do is keep an eye out for it and then, take those cues from trends, signals around us.
Are you hopeful that we'll be able to recognize those trends and cues?
I'm sure, based on what, Sheetal shared today, I think that was very, very inspirational. If, we have more people like that, if we develop more agency, I'm sure, yeah, that
Amazing.
is something to be hopeful for.
Thanks, Arihant. Nitin, your question is like, the question is more related to like the futures work that you're doing and around who is setting this futures paradigm, who gets to participate in it, who gets excluded, what are things you're seeing through your work, and especially because like this very ambitious work, you're seeing a lot of like impact through the work you're doing through data annotation. So what is this future setting paradigm that you're seeing? Who's participating in all of this? Yeah.
Yeah, so as a designer, I think that's one of the first few questions that I ask as well. Who am I designing for? And luckily at Karya, that is one thing that hasn't changed from the very beginning. The fact that we want to work with disadvantaged communities, that we want to work with communities that fall under the poverty line, and that could mean anyone. So literally, anyone with a smartphone who can speak and read their local language can work with Karya. And so that's the idea. I mean, who gets to access it is a scale problem that we're currently trying to address. How do we make it reach more people? And of course, that sets the tone for your efforts as well. I talked about inclusive design a little. And it is a challenge, but it is a challenge that can be solved by putting good design and good tech at the heart of the solution. So that has allowed us to reach a lot of people from, say, craftswomen in Odisha to farmers in Punjab to construction workers in Rajasthan. So that's made it possible. But I guess tech alone isn't the answer. It's also intent. And that actually brings me to this quote I read in an article, which is from 2011, but still very relevant. It was written by Kentaro Toyama. I hope I'm saying the name right. He was the co-founder of Microsoft Research in India. And they worked with a lot of communities, obviously. And what they found was tech being the center of their solution wasn't the key piece. The key piece was the intent of the communities they were working with the organizations, government-supported organizations they were working with. So, for example, if they worked with a corrupt organization, even though they still had good tech, the outcome of the project would actually depend on the community they worked with. And that's been the case with Karya as well, because the data industry across the world has a very bad name. It's known to be very unethical from right from the training stage where you collect this data. Workers aren't paid ethically. The work is done in digital data sweatshops, and to the technology being developed. So say chat GPTs, etc., if they're not designed inclusive in an inclusive manner, if they're designed primarily for the English-speaking population, it actually furthers the digital divide. People get left behind. So yeah, I think that's one thing that is key to Karya and central to Karya. Our ethical stance has actually helped us get the right partnerships and get the right people on board to reach more communities across India.
And one thing you're hopeful about for the future?
I think I would have answered that much more clearly before yesterday. I've started thinking about these things a bit more, but the fact that we're so proactive about it is a very good sign. And also the fact that it's so unpredictable and will keep us on our toes is also a good sign and excites me. So, yeah.
Great. I think there's a bunch of provocations here as well from the panelists on who are we setting these futures for? What are the youth working towards? What are these preferred futures? So I'll just open the floor for Q&A. Please feel free to direct the questions directly to panelists, or if you'd want anyone to answer.
Hi, this question is for Nitin. I just want to understand what is the data that you are collecting? As in, are these needs by companies? And how much do the stakeholders know in terms of what is this data going to be used for? And you were also talking about ownership that they have. So how does that model work? If you could just explain that a little bit.
Yeah. So the data requirements are quite varied, and they do depend on the client's needs or the researcher's needs. So it could be something as simple as recording a sentence in your local language, and that would end up becoming a speech data set, which would in turn be used to develop technologies in that language. So it's an interesting sort of equation where people create data sets create technologies, and technologies potentially go back to the people. As far as, and the ownership aspect is actually, like people retain ownership of the data they create. We're legally bound to pay those people again. So the data set license isn't actually sold to the company that we do the projects with. And if the same data set is sold to 10 different companies, the people who create these data sets receive royalties from those companies.
You have some kind of sessions with the community where you talk about all of these things, or what is?
Yeah, so I mean, in the last testimonial that I shared, it's interesting how the communities take it as well. Ramola Didi from Rajasthan was very proud of the fact that she was contributing to a data set that would be used to teach computers how to speak Marwadi, and where her time and effort are going, and what is she helping build. So that is part of the training where the partners on ground can explain these things in nuanced ways to people one-on-one.
Excuse me.
Hi, Nitin, my question is to you. Yeah. I was looking at the milestones that you spoke about for your user, like they start earning, then they move to learning and growing, so those 3 milestones. So in terms of the first phase that you all have done, looking at it from a capability, opportunity, motivation lens, it seems to be working great. I'm curious to understand how you've thought about in terms of your design direction to move to the next milestone of learning. If you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that, because I was excited to speak about Quest2Learn. It's one of the things that really excites me about Karya. We're piloting it this year, and the goal of Quest2Learn is to make an inclusive platform for picking up critical skills, and it's actually built on our data work platform. And how this works is, I guess the hypothesis was, if a worker is reading out sentences, basically reading out sentence after sentence, and in a lot of these cases, the client really doesn't care about what these sentences are. So what if these sentences were educational? What if we sort of disseminate knowledge through this mechanism? Do people retain this information? Do people talk about the things that they're sort of recording? And the answer seems to be yes. So not only can they produce something that's of value, they can actually be paid to do it. And so that's what's exciting about Learn. And yeah, from a design perspective, I think what's really interesting to me is, especially when you're working with communities and young people, and in the space of digital solutions for them, I think they don't really care if your solution is for impact or not, right? Young people use their phones, and there, as a designer, I feel the app that you create should compete with all the other apps on their phone. I mean, I know this, and yet I have to set a timer on Instagram so I don't end up doom scrolling dog videos. So those are those are some of the principles that we try and be conscious of. And include. So these things aren't just meant to be transactional, but delightful experiences for the users as well.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. I have a question too. I mean, I also come from a design background, but then Nitin, you don't have to. You only don't have to answer this. I'm new to the industry, and what I want to understand is how do we navigate through. How do we make sure that we engage all the stakeholders that we want to work on and then navigate through their personal interests? Because what I have seen with my little experience is because there's no synergy between stakeholders, we might end up making lollipop solutions, or it might influence the kind of intervention that we want to design. So yeah, how do we navigate through that?
I think that's a very interesting question. Stakeholder management and analysis, I think, is very, very tough, especially in the sector we are working in. To answer your question on the lollipop solution part, it's important to see what is most important to each stakeholder. And if there isn't natural alignment, there's no need to force fit a solution. So that is like a very basic principle which has to go with the design which you're having for the solution you have in mind. And you also have to slightly think about different scenarios. Like, okay, if we go ahead with this scenario, right, this is how this stakeholder could get benefited. But what could also be the downside? So that scenario planning will also help in ensuring that you don't have a dead end moving ahead with a certain solution. So I think these are some of the more practical steps or action you can take to ensure that the stakeholder management is done, in an effective manner.
Time for one more question.
Yeah, there are 2 people who wants to question, but you want to go, Gayatri?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. This question is for anyone in the panel who's called to answer this. We are talking about uncertain futures. We are talking about scalability. We are talking about really big ideas to change the world. At the same time, there is the organization that needs to grow to meet all these demands. How do you keep, all of you touched upon agility, so how do you keep the organization agile? How do you keep the people in the organization not just focused on the purpose, but the purpose itself could change? How do you keep it agile, right? Anyone? What are some key things you are doing to keep it agile?
I think that's a continuous challenge. We do face when we are working. Most of us do face, and that's we learn on the go. Something that that keeps us agile and working is to be connected to communities and our surrounding. If you're working on like we work with the communities a lot, it's very important to not lose that touch and keep learning from them. The more we listen, the more we are in touch, the more we learn. Our mission will evolve, vision will evolve, as you're saying, but that's driven by their what we learn from the communities, what we learn from our surrounding. And that's very important when we are constantly living in an evolving world with technology, climate change, etc. It's really important to be in touch with the connectedness. I think helps is what I feel.
Yeah, my question is really about like how do you move the people in the organization forward, right? Because as leaders, you have that big vision.
Yeah, I think as leader, what I feel, I was coming to that it's very important for us to be connected, but at the same time keep passing that message to our team as well. It's very important to be connected to the team as well at a more value level and not just on day-to-day work level, and those kind of conversations on a regular basis within the team, outside the team, with the communities, several times, I think helps and is important.
Yeah, can I have one last question for Sambhav? Very quickly. Sambhav, with all these data that you have, I have two questions. One is, do you have participatory and consensual participation of all the communities that you work with? And if yes, with these data, what next?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. That was part of our designing process and thinking very much in the beginning. Again, we do understand the data is very sensitive. How it's used is equally important, and how do we control that it's used for the right cause is also equally important. And then in that process, yes, we do have participatory process. Like each of the case study, we discuss with the communities and representative. We get their voices included in the data and inform ways of how much they are okay with the data being represented and their voices being represented. That's one. Second, with this data, I think I do feel that any data collection exercise, any building database has to begin with the end goal. You know what the objective you are achieving, and then you design it. So our understanding that this data has to be used in enabling more people to tell stories, more people to use it in their work was always the objective, and that's how it's designed. So now it's used by researchers, journalists, policymakers in trying to understand answers to the questions about how equitable resources transactions can be carried out, and those questions can be answered from this data in several ways, from long-term research to short-term research to media to multimedia formats, different forms of media work, etc. Is done using this data.
Can I have last question?
Sorry, the screen's flashing. Please close. So I have no option here. But please feel free to badger the panelists at networking and tea breaks for questions. There's definitely a lot to chew on. So thank you so much for all the amazing presentations you guys made. Wonderful work. And thanks for being such a lovely audience.
Thank you, Donna and the panelists, for the wonderful session. I think one question that came to me as I was listening to the panel was that as organizations, and especially as civil society organizations, what is the reimagination that we need in our ways of working? And one of the things I think I've been grappling with over the last couple of months is that whenever we think of a program design or an intervention design, it always is either about curriculum or training. So what do we need to be able to think beyond curriculum as a way of engaging with young people? What do we need to do to think beyond trainings and workshops as ways of engaging with young people? And what does all of these new tools, platforms mean for us in how we are designing our work? How are we bringing stories and looking to shift narratives rather than just sort of, technical skills as ways of building capacity are some of the thoughts that I'm left with. And I hope that you all also have a lot more processing going on with all of you as you've heard these panels. We'll take a quick tea break and we'll be back in 15 minutes for the next panel where we will have government voices talking to us about how they are engaging with futures thinking. All right. People can keep walking in. So moving forward, we thought that today, I mean, as day 2 of the summit, while yesterday was a lot about opening up ideas of the future, possibilities in the future, today we wanted to kind of keep it focused on action and solutions. And we also wanted to bring in different stakeholders who have a role to play in kind of shaping these futures for us. So in the first half in the morning, you heard certain organizations kind of talking about their approaches. The next voice that we're going to hear is that of the government as a very key stakeholder working at scale. And we have a panel which is being moderated by Nikita from Quest Alliance. And I'd request the panelists to come up on stage as well. Mr. Sham Bihari Meena, IAS Director, DET Bihar. We have Mr. Manish Mishra, who heads the strategy for NSDC, and we have Dr. Sakshi Khurana from Niti Aayog as well. So a big round of applause for them as well.
All right. Are you all set for the next set of conversations? Post the tea break. I want to start with saying that I'm extremely privileged and honored to moderate this panel with all our esteemed guests today. So thank you so much for accepting our invite to be here. I was just telling somebody that, you know, it's so nice to have a government voice into all of these conversations, especially when we're talking about future literacy and how do we really enable young people to start thinking about it, to start actioning it. And I think we heard a lot of interesting conversations over the last day and a half, where yesterday you heard a lot of young people speaking about how they are imagining the future, which is really, you know, colored by what their current realities are, what their current constraints are. And it's really difficult for them to think, you know, beyond those challenges. And the future to them looks like just solving for those only. But we also heard a lot of experts talk about, you know, this whole alternative futures and how there is not going to be only one imagination of future, but many such imaginations will exist, and how if we were to think about futures imaginatively, and that should shape our present, and we can do it through some amount of backcasting, is what Shakil was also speaking about yesterday, right? So the intent with this panel is really to bring the voice of policymakers, the voice of administrators, the voice of different government organizations to see, like, how do they place it, you know, these conversations in the system. So the first question, hence, I want to start, you know, posing to the panelist is around saying that as a country, we're at the intersection of technology, climate crisis, demographic dividend. So amidst all of these trends, if we were to kind of think about 2045, and I think we've been talking about 2045 throughout yesterday and today, what is the visualization we're imagining of the world of work? How do you think it's going to evolve? And I'm sure it's going to look very different from what it is today. So how is, you know, policy initiatives, strategies being thought about, you know, to kind of respond to these trends or even prepare for some of these trends? So yeah, maybe I'll start with Dr. Khurana, since she works with Niti Aayog and they do a lot of research, you know, on policy, and also make a lot of interesting suggestions to the government in terms of how we should look at things. So yeah, over to you, Dr. Khurana.
Thank you, Nikita and Quest Alliance, for the invitation. It's indeed been very interesting, fascinating sessions since yesterday. Talking about the trends that will be impacting, we've been discussing a lot in the various sessions since yesterday that, yes, technology, climate change, and so on. But given, if you were to talk about how the world of work is going to evolve for India, how we see work relations changing, how we see employment relations changing, what we need to keep in mind are both challenges or risks and also opportunities. And demographic dividend, as you said, Nikita, is a major strength that we have. We have a huge youth population which can be tapped, which is a huge source of, which is the future workforce that we have for the country. And we keep talking about, and Ministry of Skill in their policy, the national skill policy, talk about making India the skill capital of the world. So that all depends on young people, as we have been discussing since yesterday. That all depends on unlocking the potential that young people have. Also, when we look at the India-specific context, we know that India is a huge economy. The labor market is characterized by tremendous informalization. Over 80% of our workforce is in the informal sector. So when we're talking of the future, it's important to think of how the future trends of climate change, technology are going to impact informal workers. So many of them, when we interact with them in the field, they may not, for instance, I was visiting Jharkhand a couple of days ago, and I went to the tribal hamlets there, especially the particularly vulnerable tribal communities. And a lot of questions which we keep talking about, I realized that it doesn't even impact them. We were talking about, what kind of skill development would you be wanting? Would you be, for instance, driver training? So they pointed out that, we don't even have roads connecting us to the district headquarters. So what's the point of learning how to drive? So I think futures are going to be about reaching the unreached, reaching those who haven't been impacted at all through technological advancements or infrastructural advancements, ensuring that by 2047 or 2045, the milestone that, depending on the milestone that we keep, that these vulnerable sections or those who've not been reached, they're also able to leverage, they're also able to benefit from technological advancements, education, vocational training, translating into meaningful sources of income for them. So depending on that, that's how we need to strategize in the present, that what can be done to ensure that we're reaching all sections of the population. How can we ensure that technology, the changing forms of work, for instance, we've been talking about remote work, gig work in the different sessions that you've had, how that can impact, or how technological platforms can impact somebody in a remote rural setting. We hear of a lot of women and youth now using their Instagram or Facebook accounts, using their network of friends, families, and followers to sell their products. So the future is going to be about reaching to newer markets, to national as well as global markets through technology platforms. And that's where we're also focusing our strategies and recommendations on. I'll stop here for the time being.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Farhana. That was really useful. Coming to you, Dr. Mishra. I know you were also actively participating in all the G20 conversations. So what's the conversation there in terms of how is the world of work going to look like? What should we be doing as countries? What's the government's perspective? Would you want to talk a little bit about that?
Good morning, and very exciting exchanges that I saw in the morning coming from a lot of organizations that actually set out to create impact. And the morning conversation with that girl from Gujarat was really, that made me actually think as to what our development model has been and what it should actually be going forward. Coming back to G20 and the deliberations that happened over there, especially on the educational working group and some 3-4 tracks that were there, largely to look at how the research and development is going to shape up. How do you take technology to a lot of people? What exactly is going to be the skills for lifelong learning in the context of future of work? And the foundational literacy and numeracy, and also the foundational skills. So these were the 4 tracks that were actually where the discussions around were built. See, the world is looking at, and it's not just the developed world, but a lot of invitee countries were actually not a part of the G20 group, and they also are looking at the future with a lot of excitement and also with some caution, right? One doesn't know how it is going to evolve in the future. Looking at India, you will be soon a country of about 1 billion working population. You're talking about country reaching upwards of 45 trillion of total GDP by 2047. All that sounds very good, but is it going to be equitable is the question. One thing that is going to characterize this in future, and which we already are seeing, that the technology diffusion is happening very fast, and therefore the whole skill obsolescence that we see is also very rapid. Therefore, what you learn today may not actually be applicable, say, 3 months later, and this is the situation of now. This is going to be more rapid going forward. Now, how do you deal with that situation? Let me take a quick example of what machines are already doing or AI is already doing. About 70% of people all over the world, they actually use literacy skills in order to perform their day-to-day jobs. Out of these people, about 59% are people where the AI can actually perform the literacy skills better than these human beings already. There's a program for international assessments and adult competency, this PIAC test, and I was looking at that data, and this was actually widely discussed during those some of those workshops. Only 20, and I'm talking about the more advanced countries, only 21 to 25% of the total workforce in some of the most advanced countries have the literacy skills better than AI today. So at best, only about 1/4 of the workforce in the most advanced countries can actually possess the skill of literacy that is better than AI today. And then there's often an argument that is put forward saying creative skills is something, or human ingenuity is something that the AI can never match. But somehow the data doesn't support that kind of a thinking. So AI, the way the advancement has happened, you should not actually be very surprised if it actually surpasses the creativity element, etc., also sooner rather than later. Therefore, what is the future and what does one do? So increasingly there has to be focus on how do you work with this technology. They often say it's not AI that is going to take away your jobs, it's people who have relevant skills with AI who are going to take away your jobs, right? So how do you equip people with the right kind of AI skills, etc., is going to be a challenge. Now, looking at India as a country, you are talking about some 26.5 crore students that are in schools. Then you're talking about some 3.5 to 4 crore people that are in colleges, UG and PG. And the better quality institutions are very few and far between. So how do you make sure that you leverage technology, as Dr. Sakshi Khurana was saying? Thankfully, we have made a lot of investment already in terms of creating large-scale public digital infrastructure. Take the example of BharatNet or national knowledge networks that you have already prepared. Then you're talking about a lot of digital content, etc., that has already been prepared. the idea is to take it to the institutions, but there also you would need tremendous human capability development, the development of the leadership of this at the school level, the capacity building of the teachers, etc. Also, the other aspect that has actually been dealt with in great detail is about the climate change and also green. So I think apart from the technical vocational skills that will happen, which happens to be my area, but these are going to be the horizontals as to how do you bring in the digital skills, how do you bring in the green skills across all programs that you do. So they are going to be horizontal. Countries like Singapore have already started working on the three verticals of care, digital, and and green. They're saying they're not only verticals, but they're also horizontal. So you'll have to actually think of weaving it in every vocational program that you offer. What you also need to see as to how do you embed it as part of the education, because skills by itself would take a lot of time to penetrate. We know what has been the uptake of vocational training programs at the school level. Unless and until one embeds it at part of education, and thankfully the national education policy provides you that kind of a framework and also that intent to take the embedded skilling to schools and colleges. So that kind of a thing has got to be brought in. But believe you me, even the most advanced countries, they are all thinking. So Singapore might have a skills future program where they're investing a lot on their workforce development. India also has launched a future skills program with the help of NESCOM, where they're saying that we are going to invest in the current workforce and continuously make sure that they upskill their skills in order to stay relevant to the workforce. Japan has a brush-up program. A lot of other countries are actually working on. Australia has a very similar program that they're working on. So one resolution that the G20 ended this education working group discussions, and I would urge all of you to read it. It's a very comprehensive document. Is to collaborate and share best practices and to actually see this as a shared future. And therefore, all the learnings that are coming from all over the world. So maybe the Singaporean model cannot be the model for India, because you're also talking about such a the kind of informality that is there in the workforce, etc., and the education, etc., and the kind of differences that exist. But then there can be best practices that one can learn from. Maybe some of the other countries can also learn from our experiences and the kind of proficiency that we have shown in creating the kind of digital infrastructures that we have. So yes, there is a lot of optimism. The productivity, etc., would go up significantly. We would certainly be a much richer society. We would be more well off in terms of the kind of wealth that we generate with what we call as critical and frontier technologies increasingly taking the center stage. But at the same time, one has to make sure that it is equitable. And for that, you need to maybe look at how your education systems are evolving and how are you bringing in skills. And when I say skills, I'm not only talking about technical vocational skills, I'm also talking about a lot of life skills. I'm also talking about a lot of foundational skills that you need to work with and make sure that you create the capability amongst these students to take it forward and help them put it to good use in their regular work, day-to-day work.
That was very, very useful. I think you touched a little bit onto my next question as well, Dr. Mishra. So I'll go to you, sir. Before I pose my question, I'll read out. So our teams went out to 3 states, trying to do research with young people and trying to also do some kind of, speculative thinking around the future and visualization. But a couple of things we heard, as we went out and spoke to young people, and I'll just read out a few statements that were shared with me. One of the young students from Balasore in Odisha said, we don't know how employment will change in the future, and therefore we need to innovate constantly. We think that creative thinking must be introduced in our programs as a compulsory subject, and I think Dr. Mishra also spoke about it. So that was one statement. Another young person said, in the future, the electrician trade and diesel mechanic will not be separate. the future will be more of electric vehicles, and hence we should learn to have knowledge for both. But we are not being taught both, in the ITIs. So how do we really see our future amidst this? This was a student from ITI in Sanand in Gujarat. There was one more student's voice that I'd like to bring in, who said, in the future, there will be robots who will take up all of the manual jobs, and whatever we are learning right now will be done by the machines. So only people who will know how to work with robots and how to manage them will, and train them will be employed, and all the others will just sit at home. People who will be able to separate themselves from manual labor and set themselves apart from the work that robots will do will only be able to survive. This was an ITI student from Dadiapada in Gujarat as well. And I think you touched upon some of these statements. So my question to you, Mr. Meena, is that amidst all of these things again, how are we hence, as a department for employability and training in a state like Bihar, how are we responding to preparing some of our young people for this future? How do we build awareness about the future? How do we build preparedness about the future? And with all of this uncertainty that we're speaking about, where while we're talking about a lot of hope and optimism, it's also hard to predict it given the changing nature. So I just would like to hear some thoughts on, yeah.
Thank you, Nikitaji. It's a privilege to be here. The last line which you said, like, we are just limited by our imaginations. Well, how things are going to turn out, we can only speculate. So, first part of the question is how 2045, the slice of time, in that time, how things will look like and what we can do about it. If we want to know the future, look at the past. How knowledge has been built in this civilization. We are here on this planet from last 4 million years. In 10,000 years, we started agriculture. And we started building cities in last 5,000, 8,000 years. And then we started industrializing in the last 500 years. And we had a massive network of universities and knowledge building in the last 100, 200 years. And there's absolute burst in the creativity and the data in the last 30 years. So we are sitting at the point where we have a lot of data, we have a lot of algos, and a lot of technologies. If they talk together, we can create a massive thing, which we call artificial intelligence, and this thing will keep on increasing its power. So how does it look like? And it is so rapid. See, in the last 10 years, our younger generation is smarter than us. My daughter is smarter than me. I was smarter than my father. So the knowledge accumulation, the massive and the scale of it, and when artificial intelligence is involved, it can be tremendous. One thing. Second, I'm an administrator. I implement the policies which government decide. So my imagination goes there. How does my road look like in 2045? How the shops will look like? How the people will behave? How the sabji wala look like in 2045? How a student going to school will look like? What they are going to study there? So all those questions. So history will tell how future will look like. There's a book written by Philip Mason. He wrote it. It was an experience of civil servants. The title of the book is The Man Who Ruled India. That time, you can have the general administrator used to start his office by 7:30. At district collector, 7:30. And they close the office by 2 o'clock. And the 80% of the problems which they have faced is the revenue problems. I have been a district magistrate. The real problem with the district magistrate is like this. Law and order, first. Policing, second. Education, third. Health, fourth. Water sanitation, drainage, lighting. And you go on. Like, it is not messy, like you cannot count up 500 things, but it's like 30 odd things which we do. And mostly the 5, 6, if you do the principal component analysis, then you'll find out that most of the energy has gone into these 5, 6 things. So what would it look like? The last thing which I tell, like, I'm an administrator. What I do when I go to office, I'm a district magistrate, yeah, if I'm a director. Mostly what do we do? In a government, we run the government. I mean, we have this concept about ourselves, though it's like whole ecology which runs the government. So what do? We go to the office, 9:30, do the files, 4 hours. Even other departments, 4 more hours, 8 hours gone. 3-4 meetings, it's evening, go home. Repeat. Last 30 years, what has happened is like so much data is been provided. We know so much of it, but who is going to analyze it? Do we have that sophisticated tools to analyze it? This data is there, but algos are not there. The decision-making framework is not there. So in a classical organization, if you read the Gurlick and Urvik, these are 2 famous writers who proposed the classical organization theory, if you know. In 1936, they says that an organization used to do planning, organizing, staffing, directing, coordinating, reporting, and budgeting. These are the functions of an organization, classical organization. There may be 3 more things added. But what a district magistrate or what an administrator is normally doing is the directing or coordinating at top. They are not planning. Niti Aayog we have to plan for us, but they are not planning. They are even not directing, they are mostly coordinating. So there's a massive pressure, massive flooding of data on the administrators. And this is why we see that I'm coming from the hotel and I see that we have very smart people in Bangalore. But look at the traffic situation. What these smart people are doing with this thing? Why can't they solve it? So we have things. And then I add one more little. So last 30 years, what has happened? There's one dimension, a lot of data has been generated, analysis is poor. Now we are taking a thumb of rules like this we have to do like this. The second thing, there was a thinking in administration in 90s that government should be very small. Government should go on. They should not do anything else. What has happened? Any work in a government sector, you outsource it. If you want a financial system in a treasury system, then we went it out to some big companies like TCS, Infosys, or big companies. They come for 10 years, 5 years, they deliver their services and then go. The real-time learning for the administrators and for entire system. So somewhere, I think in 2045, we have to have this Department of Artificial Intelligence, something of that sort, which has a massive ability to understand it, to regularize it. Because these technologies are going to be the big corporates. They are going to be big winners with a certain ideological underpinnings, maybe from China, from the United States, or some European countries. We are going to mostly consumers of these technologies. So unless we understand what is it, and we define you cannot enter in this field. And we can define the criminal liability. If you have the wrong algos, you are going to jail. Until as courts are very clear, this is how to decide on it, we won't be able to solve it. So these are the few reflections.
Sure. Thank you so much for sharing that, Mr. Meena. I'm just looking at the clock. Maybe just another quick question, and maybe I'll pose it to both of you all. I think, again, over the 2 days, we spoke a lot about how young people can also lead this change. So when we're speaking about policy perspectives, when we're speaking about planning for strategies, is there a voice of the young people, being brought in? Do they have a seat on the table when we're talking about all of these things? So how are you looking at involving the young people in these conversations? And how do we find a seat on their table so they can actually lead the change and be the change makers in some sense? So yeah, maybe I'll start with Dr. Khurana and then come to the others.
So Niti Aayog leads the Atal Innovation Mission, which is all about encouraging young people, especially school students, to innovate. There are a huge number of Atal tinkering labs that have been set up in various schools and in government schools also to encourage students to come up with solutions to local problems using technology or using any kind of innovation. And as part of Atal Innovation Mission, the mission also encourages a lot of competition among young students to come up with solutions, to come up with ideas, and to bring to the table young people's voices. In our own work at the Skill Development, Labor Employment vertical, we do reach out to ITI students or Polytechnic students to understand that how do they perceive the training that they're undergoing, what is it, what are their ideas or suggestions for future initiatives, what are their aspirations, do they feel that the kind of training that they're undergoing, is it going to get them a decent job later on? So these are some of the ways through which we maintain a connect with young people.
Thanks. Would you like to add anything?
I think more platforms where these exchanges can be facilitated are needed. Atal Innovation Mission is actually one such platform. I think there's certainly a platform required to maybe reach out to a large number of younger students and also to reach out to the college students, etc. Government of India, especially the Ministry of Skill Development, has been actually partnering with institutions like UNICEF, etc. to hear the voices of the youth. We have also started this program called Yuva AI, which is Youth for Unnati and Vikas with AI, wherein we are training a lot of these ITI students on AI and some of the other emerging technologies. But that is also, in a way, serving us as a platform to understand as to how this whole thing is shaping up and how the kids see what would they actually need over a period of time in order to make meaningful contributions. But yes, I think more and more such dialogues and interactions are needed, because they are the ones who are going to be bearing the brunt of it, and they are actually people who are going to benefit out of it if this all goes well and if all goes as planned.
In a policy making, it's experts, it's bureaucrats, and the top-notch politicians, and the general environment which decides the policy. Where is the young people at the decision-making level? I'm not able to visualize. Though we work and we have the participation, we have the dialogues, but how actually it results in the policy formulation is yet to be seen in the context of AI. Number two, we also think that this is very important. For example, in Bihar, we are setting up labs, we are setting up workshops with the help of Tata Technologies. They are investing money at the tune of 4,600 crores for 3 years. 1 year is passed. We already set up the 60 labs. And AI is going to be an important component of it. So we do think that there is a need, but it's very early stage, and a lot of discussions and debates and the consultations, all these things, sensitizations has to happen, and it has to be like this is the future of the next generation. So a lot of debate has to happen, and it has to reflect in the terms of policies still.
Yeah, and I think what Dr. Mishra also said, maybe just creating some more of these platforms where we hear these voices, which is then being churned when some of these policy are being thought about, I think would be really, really helpful. And that's what we heard when we heard so many of our young people speak between yesterday and today. I think it's extremely also local, some of what they're thinking, and sometimes policies become very, very high level and away from the realities. Yes, so I think that's the intent also, to say that how do we kind of keep that young person's voice at the center of all of this. But just coming back to the audience, I'll, I think, hold off to my questions, but opening this out to some of you all now. Any thoughts, reflections? I can see a few hands up. Maybe I'll start with you and then go to you. Can somebody pass on the mic there? If you could just speak your name, if you have specific panelists you want to direct your questions to, please call that out as well. Sorry, okay, we're going there first. I'll come to you second, is that okay? Cool. Go ahead.
Hi, my question is to Dr. Manish. So you were talking earlier when you started speaking about people with AI skills taking over as opposed to AI taking over. So I'm interested in understanding what has been the thought direction for the skilling ecosystems to develop any AI competency framework that can inform upskilling of learners. If there has been any direction, then I'd like you to talk about it.
Early days, but we already have started creating a lot of knowledge, and some body of work has already emerged as far as the AI thing is concerned. Starting with our national regulator, National Council for Vocational Education and Training, they have already developed more than 100 plus future ready programs, and this is going up as with each passing day. So that is one thing. Skill India Digital is another platform that we have created, wherein we thought that it's not the job and it's actually beyond any of the government to do all this by itself. So we are bringing in a lot of private participation, and that's the platform that we have created in order to people who generate content, and we are encouraging this new age content, etc., to be put there. I already spoke about this UIAI platform, which actually is reaching out to a lot of technical institutions and working there. There is also a program for taking AI at a massive level to the schools and colleges also, which is also on Anvil, and that is also being experimented with. So the idea, that was very loosely said, but the idea actually is to encourage and sensitize more and more youth to take up AI and all the programs in the future and emerging technologies, etc., because that's the only way in which we can actually go forward. And build it as part of the curriculum is actually very, very important. Looking at it just as a technical skill probably would not help. How do you bring AI and the fundamental concepts of AI and build it as part of the education? So the actual skill may be the application of the education that you gather over a period of time, but that is how it should be taught. I mean, that's how any of the other subjects are taught in the academic system. So weaving it, more than integrating it, I would say embedding it as part of the regular curriculum is something that one needs to look at, and I think a lot of work is already on as far as this thing is concerned.
Great, thanks. We'll go to you first, and then next, yeah.
So thank you for the insightful session on the policy perspectives. So this question is of course open to the panel, but I think Dr. Manish, I'd like to hear your take also on this, since you mentioned the statistic. So there's a slight limitation of the data when we are comparing, okay, how are humans performing on standardized tests with respect to AI, and it does not account for a lot of context problem. And the challenge over here is there's no real incentive for tech companies to do better on the evaluation criteria and the assessments, because it might show their product in a bad light. So how can we, from a policy perspective, influence this gray area which is there?
Okay. I think the assessments and the way they have evolved over a period of time, there's also a lot of work that actually is required in that area. As far as creating the incentives are concerned, that concern is certainly valid. And let's leave aside this AI assessment for some time. Even the other skills that we are seeing and the way they are being assessed as to how useful these skills are for the work context is actually a question that we are grappling with, right? So I think because all these skills are going to be applied in a work context, the pressure or the incentive would actually come from the industry increasingly, though the government has got to play the role of the facilitator. This whole, when we say that VBox might actually come up with a report saying that despite of all the assessments, what you're seeing is the employment actually, the uptake is not all that great, and all these skilled people, so-called, are also finding it difficult to get employment. So, assessment, etc., this will take some more time before it evolves to an extent which actually, sort of exactly in line with the industry requirement. It just is not limited to AI. It actually transcends to other areas as well.
Would any of the other panelists want to add anything to this question? Okay.
So just to add to that question, is there on the horizon any kind of a regulatory framework for how we will relate to AI?
Are there any regulatory frameworks from an AI perspective?
Right now, no, but one is actually seeing a lot of developments in this area. And I'm sure you will see, right now there's largely programmatic interventions that you see. There are large programmatic interventions, but how does it actually translate into a regulatory framework, so to say? I think one is not very certain about it.
Yeah, but it's much needed, I guess, and that's, I guess, everyone's worry as well. Okay, we have time for maybe just 2 more questions, and I have lots of hands up, and I don't know what to do with that, but I'll go to you first, because I know you put your hand up, and then I'll come to you. Is that okay?
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Kirin. I would like to pose my question to Dr. Sakshi, ma'am. So, ma'am, you were stressing on ATL labs, basically Atal Innovation Mission. So, as per my knowledge, there were 10,000 schools where you just gave 20 lakhs per school. So for the first year, it was 10 lakhs for the materials, and the second year onwards, 2 lakhs for the implementation, and 4 lakhs for the second and third year consecutively. So are all these labs running? That is one of my questions, because out of 10,000 labs, what we see on the net or on Quera or something, so it is stated that it is only 2 to 3% which are running effectively. And what were the measures, like basically you took to give education to teachers? Why? Because in Atal Tinkering Labs, what we see is there are 4 packages, basically, P1, P2, P3, P4. And always you have been stressing on AI. And if you take, there are only 3 laptops given. So there are 60 schools, 60 students in a school. So with 3 laptops, how it can cater to all of these, and how you are expecting AI to be the next thing. So it is open to everybody, but especially to Sakshi. And lot of queries are there on this, which needs to be answered as you are the senior specialist on the Niti Aayog. So this is my question.
Thank you. So Atal Innovation Mission is not just about giving a certain amount of fund to a particular school, but it's also about mobilizing funds through partnerships with a lot of innovators, private industries, and so on. And you were talking about trainers and teachers. So these teachers and trainers also have a lot of exposure through industry experts and other leading people in different sectors. So Atal Innovation Mission is largely about mobilizing, private industry, innovators. It's not just confined to the mission housed in Niti Aayog itself. For further details, of course, I could put you in touch with my colleagues who are managing the program if you have any further queries related to the detailing of Atal Innovation.
Just a moment. And you were talking about mobilizing. So there was a video posted last year on last 3 to 4 months on, just a moment.
Sorry, could I cut you there? Because if you could catch her off the thing, then I can just have one last question and we can close this. Yes, go ahead.
So I have more of a fundamental question regarding skill development and employment in our, not just in our country, generally worldwide also. So what we are seeing right now with advent of technology in the last 30 years is we are seeing mechanizing of processes. Something that took 50 persons to do, like probably a work 30 years ago, is taking 5 people. And that results in quite a number of unemployment. And when we speak about unemployment, it's specifically skilled workforce which is being unemployed. My question, I'll probably give another example. If I have to set up a manufacturing unit, I probably can employ 2,000 people, but right now with the amount of mechanization we have, I can run a manufacturing unit, a steel manufacturing unit with 10 people, right? So when we are looking at one side upskilling, and also on the other side, when these companies are looking at continuous mechanization of processes where their workforce is getting cut down, and which is in their interest to cut down their workforce, aren't we going to face a huge problem of unemployment going forward?
Mr. Meena, you'd like to do that? Yeah, go ahead.
How we are dealing with it, how we are planning to deal with it. First, traditional training, we have to upgrade it because more of drone technology, AI, 3D printers, all these things are required, number one. Number two, we are having the skilling mega parks. In Odisha we have, Tamil Nadu we have, Bihar we are planning to have. It's actually, it's a kind of bridge course. It's a kind of the traditional training, there's a gap, mega skill centers. Third, the real training happens when you work. So we encourage our students, please stay with the company, with the industry, stay. 1 year, 2 year, your earning capacity will go up, your learning will go up. Actually, the training will happen there. So we are focusing a big way on apprenticeship programs. It's a mandatory for the organization which employs more than 4 people to have, more than 9 people, I'm sorry, to have mandatory apprenticeship programs. And government is bridging the gap, government is giving money to the companies to have these apprenticeship programs. These are 3 ways we are going to tackle it. There is a lack of skills, industries are crying, where is the skilled people? People are crying, where is the job? So these 3 ways we can bridge it. And it's working fine. Industry has to come big way because they have to put a lot of money in training because their needs are so specific, they keep on changing. The formal structure will take time. And then mega skill centers and these 2 things, and then it will infiltrate in the formal training structure, we will be able to do it. That's why Tatas are helping us in Bihar. Tata Technology with 50 consortium partners. Name a big company, it is there in the consortium partner. They are training and they are recruiting from there. And they are keeping the students with them for 2 years. So, and then they are employing them in a permanent jobs with them. So this is how we are trying to solve it.
Sure.
Excuse me.
I think I'll have to close it, but the panelists are with us for the next few hours. I think there's one more session post which we'll break for lunch. You feel free to reach out to all of them. I'm so sorry, but thank you so much for your time, and thank you for you all to be a lovely audience. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Nikita and the panelists for the lovely session. And thank you to the audience for engaging with so many questions. I think that adds to the richness of the conversations. I think like some things which stayed from the conversation, one was this idea of public digital infrastructure, which I think Mr. Manish kind of spoke about. And if we are really able to design that from an inclusive lens, then what are the human capabilities that we need to equip young people with to be able to make the most of this public infrastructure as well, right, for their own growth and development. The next thing I think was this whole idea of how do we integrate futures thinking into our own planning processes within the governments when we are thinking of policy formulation as well. What would it mean to have futures thinking workshops within government spaces where we have voices from the young people as well, contributing to how they want to shape their futures. And one of the ridiculous thoughts that came to me was that imagine if we have young people working with us on developing the kind of courses they need to be able to access the future trends in terms of green skills, digital skills, the care economy that we are talking about. Can that actually be made a reality? So with that, I'd invite the next panel, which is on listening to voices from philanthropy and civil society on reimagining our own ways of working for the future, and what would it mean to apply futures thinking in how we are looking at our work. So I'd like to invite Aarti Mohan, who's the moderator for this panel from Satwa. We have Deval from, who's a co-founder and partner at Dasra. We have Sucheta Bhatt, who's the CEO of Dream a Dream. Anshul Tiwari, the founder of Youth Ki Awaaz. And we have Gautam John, CEO, Rohini Nilkani Philanthropies. So if I could request all the panelists and Aarti to come on stage and take it forward. A round of applause, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to be here with such an eminent panel to discuss a very, very vast topic. I don't know if we can do, if we're able to discuss this in an hour, but I'm sure we hope to leave you with, thoughts that food for thought before you break out for lunch. Before we get into what our panelists have to say, I just wanted to set a little bit of context, given the room that we have here today and given so many rich discussions that have happened over the last 1.5 days. I think it's very clear that we have a very rapidly evolving social economy in India, and contours of this are being shaped equally by external forces and internal forces. If I were to look at external forces, the FCRA is literally something on everyone's mind, and what we sort of navigate and struggle with every day and what it could mean. The global grant-making, universe that earlier had a certain role to play in India is rapidly evolving, both in value and volume, in terms of what is being supported. India's G20 presidency has been one of the largest and richest set of dialogues and deliberations, and that has opened out so many different parts of the ecosystem and led to so many different takeaways that urgently can serve within the subnational context as much as the international contexts. And if you were to look at internal forces, today our Satva's estimates are that 75% of philanthropy is domestic between CSR and Indian families. And it's only going to grow into the future. CSR itself has been growing at about 10 to 12% every year, and about 25 to 26,000 crores are being deployed every year. And about 12,000 of that is going to NGOs. The rest of it, of course, is going to another diversified set of institutions. But it's also a larger reality that if 25 to 26,000 crores is the annual CSR outlay, we collect about 1.2 lakh crores of GST every month. And that's the momentum at which business in India is growing, right? Like, and to give an indication of that in the economy. There are new initiatives that India has unleashed, and we just talked about the DPG in skilling in the earlier conversation. So many different policy initiatives, from digital public infrastructure to the aspirational blocks program, that are lending a set of policy structures, frames, and support systems to look at development differently. The lines between what you might call impact and other work is really blurring today. Like Satwa has the good fortune of working across the paradigm between business and philanthropy, and lines are blurring literally everywhere. So much of the development work today is being shaped by market models and this whole nexus of collaboration between private sector philanthropy and the public sector. And so much more is being done in the value chain of that work by NGOs that are ensuring that from an equity, safety, access, inclusion lens, that we don't land up leaving behind more people in this whole new paradigm of development. So much of that is being written in script as we are executing it going forward. In terms of the NGOs, because I know that a lot of people are NGOs in the crowd, about 75 to 80% of the funding is going to development organization, but the rest is not, right? Like it's going to a whole, from industry associations to, private sector entities. Development funding is being absorbed by these entities as well. So what does that mean for the future of NGOs and the future of CSOs as we look at it? So I think at the heart of this is, what does radical futures then mean to which can account and appreciate this level of staggering diversity across the entire ecosystem. And the nexus of it is the fact that we are growing rich and growing strong while we are still young, which is unlike any other country that is going through any kind of growth. So what does this mean for both opportunities and challenges? So with that, I'd really love to go over to the panel for your thoughts. So Gautam, I'd love to start with you. Rohini Nilekani Philanthropy's work has been embedded around empowering leaders and communities to be able to carry forward and to be able to script the change that you'd like to see. So how do you see radical futures of both CSOs and philanthropy, and what do we need to think about when we say radical futures?
Thanks, Aarti, and also congratulations to Quest Alliance. It's so nice to be able to do these in person again rather than on Zoom. The energy and learnings that we have in person are so fabulous. So congratulations to all of you. Thank you, Aarti, for the introduction, for the question. I want to reframe the idea of radical futures as something that we need to build as opposed to something that we need to acknowledge. One of the reasons that Rohini Nilekani Philanthropy centers communities in our work is because we recognize that communities have perhaps the largest surface area to learn from, right? And whether that's a community that a CSO supports, or a community of CSOs, or a community of philanthropies, the nature of community itself is such that it broadens our surface area to listen and learn from. And a very interesting idea I recently came across that kind of articulates how we see this was this idea of spotting glimmers. And the underlying theory is that the seeds of the future are already in the present, and that what we need to be able to do is recognize those patterns so that we can nurture those rather than try and create a future. Because creating a future is a very, very difficult thing, as opposed to working and supporting institutions with a tailwind rather than a headwind. So for us, the structure of community is really important, and the reason that we exist as a portfolio structure, as a philanthropy, is to build the idea of a community within the philanthropy. The reason we are structured perhaps as an organization that publishes and learns is so that we are internally a community as well. So to your question, the reason that we believe community is important is, A, we believe communities are proximate, and leadership from communities is proximate, so has the greatest amount of context. B, we recognize that communities are diverse, and that there is no problem any of us cares about in this room that has, that any of us has the complete answer to, much less the approach to. So we need to consciously be able to support a diversity of approaches. And C, operating through the structure of a community is perhaps the best way we have of recognizing patterns and signals of what's emergent, rather than trying to force fit our ideas of change into the present.
Thank you so much, and would love to get into the nuances of that as we go forward. Gautam, before we go to the next panelist, I'd also love for you to weigh in on, this whole idea of Samaj, Sarkar and Bazaar collaborating is really something that's been coined and taken forward actively by by RNP. So in the context of this, in the context of the changing economy in India, what is the role of Samaj, if you were to just,
I'm going to channel what Rohini has articulated and is a foundational framework for us. I wish I could hold up a QR code and say you can download the book for free, but I forgot to bring that. But you can, and the website is samajbazarsarkar.in. I have marked a KRA for myself. But broadly, the idea is that Samaj was the foundational sector, right? that it is Samaj that created Sarkar to cede authority to be able to be efficient in dynamics and to provide shared infrastructure, whether it's health, etc. So our role is to recognize the role of Samaj as in primacy. Similarly with markets, to drive business activities at speed, scale, and some amount of efficiency, rather than do it at the level of individuals. But in recognizing that Samaj is primary, then it is to also acknowledge the corollary of it, which is that Sarkar is a creation of Samaj, and Bazaar is a creation of Samaj, and therefore they must serve the public good. So the role of Samaj is the legitimacy of Sarkar and Bazaar, but also the fact that they serve a common public good. So the role of Samaj is sometimes to create those spaces for uncommon collaborations, and they have varying balances at varying points in time. But that's the foundational role. A, the legitimacy, B, the public good, and C, to create those uncommon grounds for uncommon collaborations to emerge, keeping public good in mind. Because like we said, no problem has a solution that rests in any one of these.
It's a great segue then to say that Samaj is the center of this, to go over to Deval. You've been working over the last 25 years with organizations of every kind, the CSOs in India. And I mean, right from an organization that has grassroots serving some of the most underserved communities and has a budget of about 10 lakh to somebody that is a growing organization that has a 250 crore annual budget. We can't put them in the same color. Their needs are different. The way they operate is different. But that's, in some sense, the staggering diversity we're accounting for when we say one Samaj or one CSO sector. And the sector itself is, struggling with the FCRA. COVID has had a fairly large substantive impact. So if we were to reimagine the future of CSOs radically, what should we keep in mind, Deval?
Yeah, no, I think this conference is a great example of, while we're all here for a few days, I think it's the work that so many students across the country put together on how they imagine 2050 being in their lives, not just on the education front, but also their lives just generally and what their Samaj looks like. And so I think number one, it really comes down to, like Gautam was just alluding to, we need to first of all listen to the communities first and foremost, because let's not kid ourselves, whether we're a giver or a receiver and run an NGO or work for an NGO, we're doing nothing as it compares to the communities that are actually uplifting themselves out of poverty. And so they're the ones who take a little bit of what we are able to offer, but then do the heavy lifting. And so I think if they're not in the driver's seat of change, there is an issue. And I think over time, the philanthropic sector, both in India and globally, I think has focused at times maybe more so on the big bet solutions, which is a very sort of corporatized view of one size fits all at times, versus saying, how do we actually create decentralized solutions? And I think that the main goal with that is not centralize them in the first place. And I think that's the radically different thing we need to do. Again, if you look at the work that students have put together for this particular gathering, you will see students in Gujarat see a different view on life. Students from Odisha feel a different view on what the future lies, and students from Assam feel very different about that. And so I do feel that at times, unfortunately, at a giver perspective, at least I can say that their lived reality is very different and not encompassing even these 3 states, much less all the diversity that we have in our country. And I think at times even NGOs, for that matter, think that this one-size solution fits all, and that's not necessarily the right approach. And so I think hopefully what will happen by 2050 is that you'll see hundreds of thousands of smaller community-based organizations blooming. You will see them leading the charge. You will see them getting 90% of the funding and only 10% going to INGOs or larger groups such as a Dasra or an intermediary, getting a much smaller portion of that, because really the change happens on the ground. I think for that to happen, though, we've seen, at least in our experiences, that you have to take sort of both groups along this journey. And I say that because, let's be honest, egos also exist in the NGO sector as well. right? And so while we've been very, very lucky at Dasra to work with many organizations across the board that have scaled and created greatest impact across the country and some even globally, many of these leaders aren't from the same communities that they serve. And so that's why we launched the Rebuild India Fund, where we've already supported 108 organizations, giving them unrestricted funding for 5 years, as well as capacity building support. And the only thing we ask is how vulnerable their communities are. And that's it. There's no application process. There's a 2-hour Zoom call. And even the recommendations of these organizations come from NGOs themselves, and the investment committee are NGOs themselves. And so I do feel as givers, we need to sort of work ourselves out of the equation, and to a certain extent as well as NGOs, and giving power back to the communities we serve and being far more transparent and empowering to them, I think is important. And I think we all have a role to play to ensure that happens.
Absolutely. Would love to come to how much trust is going to play a role in empowering organizations with the kind of resources and funding that they need to be able to grow and deal with the kind of change that they are creating. So would love to go over to Sucheta. So we've been looking at the whole growth of NGOs and what does that even mean when we say growth, because it's really not a, like Gautam and they will say, one size fits all. And that's why we kind of imagine a house where at the roof you might have the governance systems, the pillars could be like innovations, what it takes to scale and what it takes to sustain. And all of those three could be very, very different sets of things. And then at the foundation, you have all the systems that are able to serve to that. Sucheta, you've walked through that journey of determining what growth means and then seeing how the Dream a Dream. And Dream a Dream has grown through so much of diffusion of what you've worked on across many different, maybe thousands of organizations that then work on life skills and so on. So would love from the organization perspective what you see as the future of CSOs, and also how do we sometimes not fall back into the comfort of the set of programs that we are operating with and the problems that maybe, like a Groundhog Day, we are coming again and again to solve for. So.
Is this better? Yeah. So I'm going to take a bit of a, not so much a Dream a Dream organizational view, but more a personal systemic view, actually. And to build on what Deval and Gautam said and what it takes. So for me, it's about how, when we are reimagining CSO or we are reimagining philanthropy, are we willing to reimagine the question of power? Right? So one of the questions is, does philanthropy drive the purpose of CSOs? Do philanthropists decide what nonprofits should do? And I don't necessarily believe in this kind of an us versus them. Somebody has power, somebody doesn't have power because of the roles they play. But for me, it's about how power gets concentrated, resources get concentrated because of historic systemic privileges that are in place. So whether it's CSOs or it's philanthropy, how are we willing to question that foundational aspect of systemic barriers, of systemic gateways that we are operating in as society that must be broken for this balance to be achieved. So for me, a radical future, both for philanthropy and for CSOs, to Deval's point, I do believe NGOs. I myself, I'm a CEO of an NGO, but I do come from a privileged background. I don't have the lived experiences of the young people that we are serving. Am I willing to question that? Am I willing to question my privilege, look at my blind spots, look at what does rebalancing power with young people look like when I am a heterosexual, upper caste, able-bodied woman, right? So that's for me really going beyond the question of programs. Can we stop looking at life skills programs? That has been our journey. We worked on developing life skills, offering opportunities to develop life skills in young people for 25 years. And then as they started growing older, we thought these were set. These young people are set. They're going to be done for life. But what happens? They become 25. They don't get jobs because of their caste identities. girls are married just because they are girls, they have to grow up their career and they become mothers. Disabled children are not well able to access our programs, forget general resources. Even a non-profit program, we have not been able to make it as disabled friendly as we want it to be. So then what are we saying? Is just life skills programs enough? No. A re-questioning of systemic barriers that will keep pushing children back into spaces of poverty, into spaces of oppression, even if they have the life skills, became the question for us. And that's really where we are imagining a radical future, both for philanthropy and for ourselves.
Much more fundamental questions of how you're looking at engaging with the people that you serve, and would love to go with that theme to Anshul. Anshul, Youth Ki Awaaz has been at the forefront of working with young people and making sure that they are at the same table in all tables, right? So how do we look at what is the role of young people, and where do young people need to be seen, heard, and understood, and where they need to participate, so that we can imagine a more equitable future of the philanthropic ecosystem?
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me here, and that's a wonderful question. I think young people need to be heard everywhere. That's really the reality. I think since I started Youth Cause 15 years ago, I was just getting done with high school at that time. One of the biggest challenges that I faced was how much people were able to trust me because I was young. And that is an issue that I still see in many organizations that are youth-led. The amount of trust that is put in a young person-led organization is much lower than somebody who is much older, right? So I think the first thing that we do need to change is our ability to trust young people and their ability to run organizations and create impact. Second thing is that I feel like in the last 5 to 8 years in particular, technology has played a very big role in how young people consume information and how it impacts how they're actually working on issues around them. Of course, social media, Instagram, Reels, it's become a very big part of every young person's life. It's sort of dictating how I assume the world is going to look like, or the world should look like. And I think we need a little bit more. I run an organization that is based on the internet, that sort of depends in many ways on social media, but the negative impact that social media is having on a young person's ability to actually realize their full potential is tremendous. It's drastically higher than what we would have imagined 15 years ago. So I think there is a definitive need for us to look into that as a problem. And how future investment in such emerging technology can actually lead to better outcomes instead of outcomes that are worse off. We now today understand much better what social media or even emerging tech can really do to the psychology of a person. So I think there is a definite need to sort of invest in those areas. Coming back to what others on the panel have said, and I'll just reiterate that, I think 10-15 years ago, the idea that there could be unrestricted funding in India did not exist. Most organizations that started alongside Youth Ki Awaaz, they sort of ended up becoming more project-based organizations, something that you also mentioned, right? That you work on the issue that you're getting funded for. So I may have started for youth leadership, but I got funding for child rights, so now I'm a child rights organization, right? That seems to be going away, and more actively so. We are now seeing two major changes that are coming about. One is that we find more youth-led organizations that are getting access to, the access is not a lot, but they're still getting more access to unrestricted funding that they were getting 10-15 years ago. And the second thing that we're seeing is that young people are now starting organization with a finish date in mind. They want to actively resolve issues and move on to the next big thing. The idea that I want to run an organization for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years is now slowly and steadily going away. We run a fellowship program through which we've supported about 150 such young people, who've started organizations in climate change, menstrual health, access to education for young girls, and so on. And what we've seen is almost 35% of them started with a very specific issue in mind, resolved it, and now are working on a completely different idea altogether. And that has happened because the people who were supporting them were not hung up on the fact that they were, they're supposed to focus on only one issue or only one area or geography. So I think we need a lot more of that. We need a lot more focus on enabling and empowering young people who are able to resolve these problems a lot quicker. And that's where what Deval also mentioned comes in, that people from within communities who are able to see and experience these challenges a lot better are probably the best solutions for those problems as well. And that's where maybe a considerable amount of investment, in the future needs to go in, especially for, like I said, I mean, organizations and institutions, groups that are led by young people who are under 25. And we do need to reduce the trust deficit that sort of exists even today between, say, a funder and a fundee, because that's where a lot of the power dynamic also lies, that, I'm giving you the money, so I know better. And I think, honestly, like in the last 3 years, I'll just add one last point, which is in the last 3 years, between organizations like Dasra, RNP, say an organization like Rain Matter, APPI, and so on and so forth, right? Just 4 or 5 organizations, we've seen this trend change a lot. So now, if there were 10 more, 20 more philanthropic organizations who had the same approach, I think the paradigm would start shifting automatically. So I think we definitely also need a lot more focus on getting more philanthropists to come out and say that, okay, we are willing to commit to this idea, to this future that young people can build for themselves and for others around them.
No, absolutely. It draws in the most critical question that you raised to say that how do we have philanthropists and the philanthropic ecosystem open itself out to more possibilities than the one they're looking at now. And while you mentioned the 5 funders and we have RNP, I don't know if we could mention the next 10 funders who are like that, right? Like coming to unrestricted funding, I remember this quote by Ingrid Chinath, and I wish she was in the room, and when she was at CSIP, at CRI, she was asked by a funder saying, how much of my money is going to the ground? She said, 0, because I'm using it all for my organization, because if I didn't, then how would we be able to tackle the kind of challenge we're tackling on the ground? And none of us know the solution while we are starting off. We at best have a set of hypotheses that we're all working towards and working very closely with communities as we do that. So would love to actually tease that thought a little bit more with you, Gautam. How much do we need philanthropy to trust, and how does that even come about? And you've walked that journey between trust and then, even to an extent understanding or appreciating how much have you traversed that path. So would love to, have your thought there.
No, great question. I think Deval and I were talking about this earlier. And fundamentally, if we lump everything under the bucket of trust, we tend to over-index on accountability. You can require a great deal of accountability on fiduciary matters, but a very low degree of accountability on programmatic work, right? Because like everyone has acknowledged, programmatic work is dynamic, it evolves, because sometimes you might start off as an education organization and realize the challenge is really health and sanitation. You want to be able to address those because that's the community you work for. And I asked Deval, 25 years of Dasra, how many organizations have you supported? And he said about 1,000. And I said, how many people have you given money to and they have run away with it, like defrauded you? The answer is 0. We've supported perhaps 200 organizations in the 2 decades Rohini's philanthropy has been about. That has never happened. So sometimes I wonder when people say this trust deficit, I struggle to understand what it is. Because most people in this place, and in this room certainly, are here because we deeply care about a problem. So the idea that there is going to be fraud is evident, really not a challenge. I mean, I'm curious to know if anybody in this room will raise their hands if I asked, do you know of a founder or an NGO that has committed financial fraud? And I don't have an answer to it. And even if it happens, there are ways to address it. The second one is on trust on impact, right? Ultimately, the goal is transformation or progress. Locking people into a theory of change on day one of a 12-month, 24-month, 36-month, 48-month, 60-month journey essentially means that nobody will ever change, even when the universe around you changes. And I find that really challenging, right? Because we all care about change, transformation, improvement. So, and secondly, to recognize that in that journey, there are things we'll have to let go of because they didn't work. Now, if we, as philanthropy, don't make space for organizations to acknowledge that this didn't work. And it is not a model failing, it's a learning that we will progress from, and that other people can learn from it and make new mistakes, not the same mistakes or approaches. We'd be in a much better place. And ultimately, trust is what allows that to happen. So our theory is that you don't end with trust, you start with trust, right? And you start with trust because you believe we're in this journey together. We will hold you accountable on fiduciary terms because that is a non-negotiable. But we will take the journey with you to learn from what you're seeing, such that both our rate of change or surprise decreases over time, such that we become a little clearer about this unmapped area that we're fellow travelers in. So the answer on trust is really, A, unbundle it. B, there are areas where trust is where accountability is non-negotiable. There are areas where trust should be non-negotiable because ultimately it's a journey we're on. Civil society aren't contractors to our theories of change. We are fellow travelers in this journey of change. And to do so, we must trust each other on that journey, to be able to recognize changing realities, to be able to recognize changing roles, and to be able to respond to the needs of our communities. If the community says, give me, I want access to clean drinking water, but you are funded to education, what are you going to do? I do think that one of the shifts that happened over COVID was that funders were able to realize that, hey, we've got to give, if they want to have meaning in their community, we'll have to allow them to address urgent, proximate community needs. I hope that stays with funders over the lifetime of that journey.
That's a great hope for the future of philanthropy there. And Deval, the other side of trust is this necessity to collaborate. I mean, I think in many ways, a single funder, single program, single entity is receding by far. And as much as funders are coming together of different kinds and to create a certain flow of capital, resources, and expertise, we want the NGOs as well to collaborate. And sometimes it helps to think of NGOs as a set of capabilities they are leveraging to address a set of responding to the environments that they're working in, more broadly as well. There's always an inherent power dynamic that exists in this collaboration. There's a little bit of the scarcity mindset as well, because you're still conditioned by when am I going to get the next check if I don't have this IP that I have created last. So in that environment, how have you ensured that collaboration is successful, especially among NGOs, and is collaboration among NGOs a certain pathway towards looking at the future?
Yeah, so I think it's easy to do once you're able to align everyone again on the community themselves. And I say that because you realize, number one, given the vastness and the diversity of the community, as we just spoke about, and the lack of equity and the increased privilege many of us have had, it can't be one solution fits all. But I think bringing everyone together and then aligning on one thing that they work towards. We did, about 4 or 5 years ago, I remember these India Philanthropy series where we interviewed multiple philanthropists across India on their theories and whatnot. And I remember in something that Nandan had said then was, it has to, again, be a big, hairy, audacious goal, large enough that then no one can do it on their own. And I think COVID demonstrated that. As well as, to a certain extent, the pressure that the sector has currently with various regulations. I think I've seen far greater solidarity today as a sector than I have in the last 25 years. And so I think that also demonstrates that when something is larger than only you can handle, collaboration is actually quite easy. In no way does that mean everyone ends up doing the same program. Again, I think that is a very INGO way of looking at things. That is a very bureaucratic thing of collaboration means everyone does my model. I think there has to be one or two things that again, the sector can come alongside and say, if we do this together, we'll just have greater value and we'll move the needle on something as ambitious as is the SDGs or anything that, again, is encompassing 1.4 billion people. And so I think the only issue is it takes a lot of time to build that trust and a lot of resources, and you have to have a deep listening mindset. You have to be unbiased. But we're seeing many organizations. I mean, again, whether it's Dream or Quest2Learn or so many others that have scaled over the years, they've only scale through partnership and collaboration. And again, not at all saying the NGOs that they partner with have to do exactly what these organizations say, but it's maybe one element of what these organizations do. And on the flip side, clearly there's value that these other organizations get by getting technical support, some sort of resources, access to platforms like this that they wouldn't otherwise be able to access. And so I think it's very possible. We're seeing at least this right now, we're managing 10 to 12 collabs on different issue areas when it comes to first 12 to 18 months, getting people aligned, having everyone say, do whatever you're doing when your job, so to speak, but what is the one thing you can do together? And I think it's important, but it is something clearly we're seeing more and more. And in a session that both you and I were in more, at least there was a conversation about how currently I think 4% of Indian philanthropic funding goes towards collaborative initiatives, and that's going to go to 20% by 2030. And so I do think there's an ability for more capital to come in as well. But it also takes a certain size and scale of an organization to be able to do that. And I think it's important to realize you have to actually have the street credibility by doing something on the ground first before you kind of sort of look at maybe more of a collaborative approach.
Thanks for that perspective, and it's hopeful to think that 20%, that's a large number, and I hope that it beats that percentage as well in terms of collaborative funding. Angel, you spoke earlier today about the fact that it's been hard for youth-led organizations and organizations that are working with young people to then be able to look at their scale and their growth in this environment. Would love your perspective on why that is.
No, absolutely. I think there are actually multiple reasons why that's the case. I remember we were working with a group of organizations that were working in the space of access to menstrual hygiene, and they were all supported by an INGO that was working in India. And this particular INGO had their FCRA cancelled, right? And of course, I mean, that NGO got affected, but the collateral damage was that all of these 18 organizations now did not know how to sort of, go about their next month, their next week, and so on and so forth. Thankfully, we were able to sort of get enough resources for them to be able to make it to the next 6 months. But a lot of them face the same question again after 6 months, right? So I feel like there are two things that we learned from this. First is, as a young, so the first question is, of course, I mean, I think we've all addressed the philanthropy part of it. What can philanthropists do? What can, funders do? I think on the side of the young entrepreneur, I think models need to be rethought. Social good is not charitable anymore. It's a necessity, right? And people are starting initiatives to address real challenges, real problems. I think we need a better degree of awareness and sensibility around how do you financially sustain an organization that essentially rests on public good, right? There may not be a profit motive, there may not be instant capital coming in and so on and so forth, but how do you ensure that the founders, the core team is in place, is able to work together, and is able to put together a model that can actually help them do that. In my own journey, I actually realized this very early on. I remember sitting with one of my earliest mentors and having this discussion that, okay, do I register YK as a non-profit? Do I register it as a for-profit? I think many founders go through this, thought process. And there's something that, he told me, which seemed too simplistic to me at that time. And that was that, well, if you want to do public good, be a non-profit. If you want to do, if you want to make money, be a for-profit. I walked out of that meeting thinking that, okay, what if I want to do public good and also make money in the process, right? Why should it be something that I am having to, let go of in the process? And I think from that moment onward, our focus essentially rested on the fact that we wanted to create a value-based business model that can sustain the platform that we are building, regardless of whether we have a funder or not. And I think that's the approach that a lot of young people who are now wanting to start their own initiatives without necessarily having the backing, financial backing, need to put in perspective when they're going out and building those organizations, right? And I just wanted to add two quick things to what Deval and Gautam both mentioned. One about collaboration, the other about philanthropic funding in general. I think one of the best areas where I have personally seen young people's organizations collaborate is at the common point that they're stuck at. So I think when two organizations sort of try and figure out that, okay, we are not able to grow beyond this point, and neither are you. But if we're able to get together, we'll be able to probably, get going much faster. We've seen the most meaningful collaborations happen at that point. Otherwise, what we've mostly noticed is that organizations get busy in their workings, and so on and so forth. That idea of collaboration sort of takes a backseat, right? And the second thing is that patient capital really helps, because, like Gautam already mentioned, programs keep changing, your theory of change keeps changing. And so on and so forth. So I think having access to capital that is really patient with your model is probably the most important thing that a young entrepreneur needs today, to be able to build an organization that can have long-term impact, in their communities.
Absolutely, and it reminds me of the collaborative that we run with Sucheta as well, where we literally requested the funders not to be part of the engagement for the first 9 months and just patiently wait. We were, of course, giving them, regular updates, but they were not part of the conversations because it took the group 9 months to trust each other. And absolutely what you said, the common point, and we had 16 organizations coming together to create a life skill scale, which was beautiful, right? Like that kind of an output could not have been achieved if we didn't have deep trust and we waited patiently. So Sujita, I wanted to actually use that as a springboard to this next question of sustainability as well, right? Like you've been working in the space of young people, and Dreamer Team has had a great journey, but I'm sure the questions of sustainability still loom large with you, and then also the question of relevance, and like how do you see your future in serving these young people, in a way that's radical? So,
Sustainability of impact or funding?
Both. But more the sustainability of impact, because I feel like funding, we've at least looked at different pathways, but how do you, look at relevance and the sustainability of the impact work that you do?
Sustainability is, because we're a life skills organization, for us sustainability is if young people make healthy life choices as they become adults, right? So that's the only measure of sustainability. And that's, because we track our young people through their adult journeys, where we reach the place of realizing that just life skills is not enough. So if I can be convinced that young people are able to make healthy choices which aligns with who they are, that's when I will know we are sustainable. And that's where I know the work is not done, because even though we are consistently able to build their life skills, like I said, systemic barriers are still coming in their way. So then my role today is not just about let's empower young people, but how can I shift the education system so that they can see young people for who they are, allow them to thrive in who they need to be. And that is a change in, like I was talking earlier, the power dynamics inside the education system, the systemic cultural norms that we have inside of education system that only rewards certain type of children and is leaving almost 90% of them behind. So to your point, in terms of relevance, are we able to keep looking at the problem and bringing in nuance and understanding in terms of why this challenge is so huge, and why even after 25 years, I can't put a hand on my heart and say, yes, my young people are thriving, because I know that a majority of them are not. So that's how I look at impact and sustainability.
Very interesting. The last 1.5 days have also been about AI, and that's something that we hear as a buzzword, as something that people worry about. So to the entire panel, in your context and speaking to the future of philanthropy and CSOs, where does AI play a role? What could we be excited about? What could we be worried about? Gautam?
Good question. I think the most common example thus far is ChatGPT generated proposals. And I have to say they're really obvious. But more to that point, right? I think for us, the thinking is how can it enable individuals rather than replace individuals. So what is the level of support it can offer to the mundane tasks? How can it free up capacity for the complex work that all of us would like to be doing, but perhaps don't have as much time. So people-centered AI is something that we're really excited about. We've funded a center at IIT Madras around language. In the context of India and the diversity of languages and culture, it's something we're really, really excited about. The idea that we don't need one single language, that we can all speak in our own languages, yet understand and comprehend each other is something that's fairly powerful in terms of motivations. I think the downsides, of course, are the more dystopian futures. Ever since I quit the platform formerly known as Twitter, I'm no longer exposed to them. But broadly, I believe that in the Indian context, to enable and safeguard the diversity of languages, cultures, approaches that exist, that AI might help us make sense of the other without having to homogenize.
Very well said.
Yeah, no, I guess I think in terms of running and supporting collaboratives, I feel that AI can play a huge role at mining the data, at coming up with some level of hypothesis that comes through it, as well as reduction of transaction cost in supporting organizations as well. And so like I was saying with, for example, whether it's the rebuild organizations that we're supporting, we have 108 sort of 2-hour Zoom calls. It would be great. In fact, we're speaking quite closely now with Sanjay Purohit to see if we could use one of their AI platforms to go through all of those calls and come up with trends that are sort of existing in small nonprofits across India. Clearly at Dasra, at least, we have multiple team members doing this. We all have our own biases and asking questions. So we're hoping that that can play a role. Simultaneously, we also have a family philanthropy giving network called Giving Pie. We have 267 families that give a cumulative of 1,000 crores annually to India. Those conversations also, how do we sort of start bringing in trends and analysis that makes our work, honestly, a little bit more efficient. So I think those are a few areas that we're hoping. And then we're working quite closely with Donald Lobo and helping him sort of support smaller NGOs to use AI more effectively in their work too. So I think at all three levels, there is a usage for that, just like the internet was. 30 years ago when I went to college, very few people even had email addresses. So I think it can be used for good, but we just need to figure out how.
And at the individual levels as well, right? Like we have this hashtag called AI Karo. If somebody has a very, where do I look for this, right? Like you say, okay, don't be a dinosaur, AI Karo. But I think enabling at the three levels you mentioned is very, very interesting.
I'm again going to take a systemic lens to this. And at the same conference that we were all at, there was this seasoned person working in the development sector, and she said when internet was coming, it was a huge hype, right? That access to information is going to take away racism, it's going to take away casteism, because everybody can now access the same information at the same time. It's going to change the world, and we're going to have this equitable world. And for me, AI is, again, we are sitting on the same thing. It's not so much for me whether AI will change the development paradigm or bring a more justifiable, just or equitable world, but it's who are making decisions about what AI is used for. And my hypothesis or submission is if you have rural, marginalized women, young people from India and Africa making these decisions versus the same heterosexual upper caste, upper class men who made the decisions about internet, that is going to change is going to make the difference in terms of the impact and implications that AI can have for society. So not AI itself, but who makes the decision.
I think everybody's already said everything, but I'll just add very quickly. I think we are seeing a lot of AI innovation in multiple spaces, in healthcare, in access to justice, work that's going on with courts, many sort of organizations sort of emerging in those areas. So of course the future is extremely hopeful. But like Sucheta already mentioned, I think there is a side of it that we need to look at already. Because when the internet came about, when social media came about, everybody was hopeful, and then platforms like Meta, they became too big, right? And there was questions of civic integrity and electoral integrity getting affected, right? So we already have the history and the knowledge that this can potentially happen if something grows too big and is completely uncontrolled. So not to say that we need to control AI, but to say that we need to already start thinking about what could the potential impact on civic integrity really be. Of something like AI. I'm on the, a couple of us started an organization called the Misinformation Combat Alliance, and we work with the Google News Initiative, a whole bunch of publications, fact checkers, etc. And one of the biggest concerns that we as a collective have is how information is now being completely, tormented using AI. And somebody who's consuming it is very easily believing it to be true because of how posh it seems, right? So I feel like, and that's just one of the examples. There are issues of deep fakes, there's gender justice involved there. There is a lot of climate misinformation spreading, that is AI generated. So I feel like there is already good enough time for us to stop and start thinking what could be the potential harms and start investing in areas and solutions for that, when it comes to AI. But of course, like on the enabling side of it, it's endless. Like it could really empower the next generation of civil society leaders to be able to process information a lot better and make decisions a lot faster.
Thank you so much. I think we have a variety of perspectives on where AI could help us, make better decisions, give us better information, process that information. But it's very important, like you said, to ensure that the right people are designing or are in the room to make that happen. We have some time for questions, so would love to see if we have questions in the room. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Shruti. I lead the product and technology team at Quest Alliance. Really great to have you all here and part of this panel. As somebody who's been in the technology space for a long time, almost 15 years, it's very interesting to see that nonprofits and development sector are starting to embrace that more and more. I would love to hear from you guys sort of examples of where you see that happening really well. Like maybe one example that comes to your mind of, great use case for technology in the development sector that you see philanthropy supporting.
So over the last couple of years, we've ended up supporting 3 organizations that start with the word tech. And they function at very different levels. So there's the Tech for Good Fellowship, which helps organizations implement really low-cost, free solutions to just improve productivity, right? Email, ERP, that sort of stuff. And the benefits are secular. Any organization that is able to bring technology to bear to recurring transactions to improve communication has seen manifold returns. Then there's the Tech for Good Labs, which helps organizations think about and reimagine solutions at the level of their programmatic work. So for example, they helped Ajivika Bureau rebuild their IVRS system using open source, lowered costs, increased efficiency, and they've done the same for many others. But that is almost a consulting approach to say that we will understand your problem and then help you build most likely free and open source software that lowers ownership costs, reduces vendor lock-in, and improves efficiencies. And that happens quite a lot. At the third level, for example, we have what Deval mentioned, Tech for Dev, which says that there are common needs across institutions, and we will build open source products that are easily user configurable. And then at the fourth level, there's to say that there's some infrastructure that is necessary at the level of national infrastructure, whether it's Diksha, and that allows everyone to play. So I don't think there's a single level at which it works. We've seen it work at every level. 3 of them start with tech, the 4th doesn't. But just the last few years has been remarkable. But to the word of caution that everyone has had on the idea of whether it's technology or internet or AI, and there was someone who helped set up Microsoft Research Labs maybe 15 years ago in Bangalore. His name was Kentaro Toyama, and he has a great book called Geek Heresy, which I still recommend everyone reads. And the central thesis is that tech amplifies human intent. So the fundamental thing to do is align human intent and then bring the technology to amplify it. Because tech alone, the corollary of this is that technology will amplify existing divides. It won't close it. So doing the human connected work, relational work first, before the amplification via technology, which is where centering it in community is really important, is something that we've seen as really, really vital.
Any other examples? Okay, yeah, there.
much of the work in the development space is on expansion. So we started off this conversation talking about the amount of money that is coming in. And a lot of effort in that is towards expansion, growth, in a sense, conquest of other areas, etc. Very male, very masculine connotation. In your conversations so far, a lot of you have had very feminine connotations of care, empathy, collaboration, etc. Both obviously need to be held together because all of you run successful organizations. How do you put both these together realistically?
By not making them one or the other. Yeah. I think my experience of that is the final goal. If you make the final goal one or the other, then you end up in a path which is one or the other. But when the final goal is both, I want every child in India to thrive. I have an ambitious goal for every child, but that thriving is their ability to empower themselves and change the system around them, which is a complex ask that I have put of myself, that the system itself is empathetic and caring of every child, which is why they thrive. So for me, the way we define this end goal, if you're willing to hold complexity and we're willing to hold both as the long-term vision and not say, if you scale, you will dilute your programs. If you stay, the only way to remain, maintain the fidelity is to stay small. Unless, if you're willing to break those either odds and imagine an end point which is both, is for me the way to.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to add to your point. I think the binary is the challenge, like Sucheta said, but also one of the default positions of civil society seems to be on a sliding scale of engage or oppose, right? And I think the third option isn't in that scale, but exists outside of it. How do we transform? Then we lose the binary and we say that we are in service of a larger goal, and then our role is to incubate a community that can achieve this because we represent the diversity. It's almost like a fractal. The initial seed conditions kind of determine the outcome at every level. So I just want to say that the idea of transformation rather than opposition or engagement alone is sometimes one way of thinking about it.
Yeah. I'm Bibhu. I'm from Odisha. I work with a small organization called Youth for Social Development. Basically, I born, brought up, studied, and working in the same community since last 15 years. So in the beginning, we have a lot of innovations in terms of working with communities in varieties of issues which affects them. And at the same time, we have a lot of challenges in terms of getting good people to our team, understand a lot of strategic priorities, programmatic goals, a lot of other technical things in this sector which is emerging. And at the same time, we are finding very difficult to cope up with the techno-managerial changes which are rapidly happening. In the first years. In the second decade, after 2017, we face a lot of challenges in terms of regulation, in terms of compliances, in terms of restrictions in our approach, the kind of work do. So what are your few important specific tips to the small organizations who are working remotely, basically the community-based organizations? How do you reimagine the future of, how do you reimagine the future of existence of small NGOs working on ground? What are your tips?
Deval, if you...
Yeah, so I think, one of the things that we've done, and we should definitely talk offline after this, is we've actually been partnering with GuideStar for a decade now to do sort of all of the legal and financial diligence of any organization that we support. more because then that is publicly available. So hopefully the NGO doesn't have to go through that same process again and again. But given exactly what you've just said, GuideStar, especially in the last 3-4 years now, has been holding multiple workshops, both on Zoom and in person, as and when changes in the laws or interpretation of the laws happen, which is now literally every month. So I think whether it's GuideStar, Norshid Dadrawala also has a phenomenal sort of WhatsApp group that we can put you on, but I feel like there's individuals or organizations, accountable in Delhi, that are at least broadcasting this information as and when it happens, and it's all accessible for free. And then, like I said, GuideStar, to my knowledge, and I'm sure there are others, but they also then do the workshops on a regular basis, helping small and medium NGOs understand these shifts. But I would say, while in Rebuild we give, like I said, unrestricted funding for 5 years, we also have organizations themselves, if they want, select areas that they need capacity building support in, and every single one says legal and compliance. And especially, I think, in smaller towns, unfortunately, the accountants are never sort of equipped to only handle NGO business, which means their insight on what's happening with the laws are also very different. But this is definitely a need that needs to be solved, especially for the smaller ones.
Just wanted to add one point to that. And at Satwa, we've been working on a platform, a public good called the India Partner Network. And we've been running, masterclasses, webinars in the local language, and exactly what Deval said has come up as, legal compliance. How do we navigate these kind of reporting mechanisms and so on? So we find that decomplexing it and ensuring that there is an update every time and people are able to access information very easily through WhatsApp and other means is something that's very important to navigate those one-on-one issues, then, which kind of take away time from the core of the work that you're doing. So would love to chat after the session is over. I know we had 2 more questions. We had a question behind first. Yeah, she and then her, and then I think we have to wrap up. We have 5 minutes. Okay. She's giving, 5 minutes. Yeah.
You spoke about proximate leadership, and I curious about the tools that you use to build a common vocabulary to sort of like empower this sort of decentralization.
So this is still sort of a learning in process, but we've now gone through 4 rounds and supported. We've, I guess, looked at close to 150 to 200 organizations with sort of a vulnerability index that we've created, which helps us just understand and identify various intersectionalities of oppression, which then serves as sort of a guiding post on which are the groups we support. So the vulnerability index is one. I think the second is, does the leadership team, and that includes the board as well as the management team of the organizations, even if they're small, they'll always have both a board and usually more than just one founder, for example, looking at it. Have they had lived experiences in the community themselves? In the sort of the oppression that they're trying to fight against, because we also feel that many times because of those lived experiences, they've not been able to access the same privilege that all of us on stage have been able to access, honestly. And so that's another sort of area. And then sort of trusting networks themselves. And so Gunj, we all of course know and trust. They have 700 NGO partners across the country. They recommend groups that they have worked with and they can vouch for. RCRC Collective as well. And there are very sort of various other groups that we've sort of tapped into to say, this is kind of the criteria, this is the budget size, who do you think fits that? And we trust them. And so I think that's kind of the approach so far. We also are about to now have, because we have over 100 organizations in the portfolio, having them now recommend organizations. Because this collective and Rebuild India Fund is for them, not at all for us as Dasra. And so it is very much about, like a producer-owned company, that they only actually now are part and parcel of selecting organizations. They'll go through a vetting process that they only decide upon. And every three years, even the investment committee is voted in by the portfolio themselves of NGOs. And so it's really bringing sort of these principles, which is handing power, which should have been in the community in the first place. And I think more importantly, when we talk about trust, like Gautam was saying, and we work with quite a bit of, number of families, it's flipping the question and saying, how can the NGO trust you? Because they've been doing this work for 15 years. You've just started your giving. And I think, again, not all donors, but those that are more empathetic, those that bring both the masculine and feminine sides to the conversation, they do realize that they actually are privileged to support this organization because this organization is doing the heavy lifting. And I think that breaks down a lot of these trust barriers in that process. And typical then CSR questions are not being asked anymore, thankfully.
Thank you. I'm Revati. I'm a Rebuild India partner, so I'm very thankful to Dasra. But in 18 years, that's the first unrestricted fund we got. I started as a young person, but now I'm pretty old. And when I attended the Dasra workshop, it was like I was in some other world because that's not my experience until the past 17 years. So my question is to all of the people on the panel. I mean, it's great to hear about these things, and I'm happy that we got into Rebuild India. But sometimes it's also, it's not very open, you know, like how do you get into this trust-based philanthropy side? Because somehow we are stuck. I'm in Nagapattinam, it's a coastal town in Tamil Nadu. From there, reaching out to many of these Delhi, Bangalore, Bombay seems so distant, and we are at a loss. Second question, what do you think about how the CSR funding scenario is going to be in 2040 or 2050? Because it's still stuck to geography. 75% of the money goes to education, but education in Tamil Nadu is the highest spender, but all of it goes to Chennai, Kanchipuram, and Chengalpattu, because the CSR, the companies are in Chennai, and they're supporting organizations only in the cities. And clearly, even if it's a very good project, they openly tell us, wow, this is a great project, can you move it to Chennai? So I can't move all the nomadic tribes from other districts to Chennai. So it's impossible. So some amount of criticism has come in with that MEA report, but what is happening on that? I want to see more voices who have power, like Satwa and people to talk against this, because this whole geography is really restricting money to coming to remote rural areas. And third, what do you think about this criteria to support any organization, even in trust-based philanthropy, that if the organization has done a project on that scale, that's when you're eligible to a grant of that scale. Like if you're giving 10 crores, you should have already implemented a project for 8 crores at least. So is that even a viable thing, especially when we are talking about Samudai, when we're talking about rural India, when we're talking about vulnerable communities who have been left out in this process for a very long time? So I would just to know your reflections on that. Thank you.
Maybe I can take the question on CSR and pass it to you for the trust-based. Well, like any other organization that has intent but takes a while to make that journey, I would say that CSR is kind of in the same place. Over the last year at Satwa itself, after a few years of working together with different organizations, we've managed to influence them to go where the need is rather than where they are located, and let go in order to gain more. And it has worked. I mean, we got an organization to completely, they had some 35 different NGOs they were supporting across. We got them to take the entire funding and take it to the aspirational districts. And then we had to solve the problem of who's the NGO that's going to work in these aspirational districts, because we realized that there were not that many NGOs that were working in the districts, in the geographies that they had. So it is certainly changing the number of CSR that are collaborating with other kinds of philanthropy to be able to support something larger. The number of CSR that are working with government to be able to find sustainability post their role in sort of accelerating that is growing. But it's taking its own time, because it's the same universe that they are, they are sort of grappling with, and all of the stakeholders, and none of that is changing. But I would say that in that, a lot more of joining forces with, Dasra, Samita, and the whole bunch of us being able to amplify this and actively influence and bring a lot more at tandem rather than do it sequentially is really what we need, I think. And we're already on that path. I mean, we're already sort of collaborating with all of the other, support organizations in the space. I would definitely say that CSR is trudging along that path, or albeit a little bit more slowly. So, on the trust-based.
I mean, I just see the please close. So yeah, please, anyone else should speak.
I'm usually on the first panel after lunch, so most people are asleep. This is the first time I'm on a panel that's between you and lunch. The short answer is that we need to talk more about how trust-based supporting community-based work through a trust-based approach really delivers the change we want to see, rather than locking people into theories of change. On the question of how do we make big leaps in funding, I don't have an answer, because very often people want to know that you have had experience before doing this, but past experience is very rarely a good guide to future work. But broadly, talking more about trust, talking more about the journey, meeting leaders and communities where they are, and most importantly, letting you all go for lunch.
I just want to add one point to one of the questions that you asked, which was that how do you get access to such funders actively, right? And I have realized this through my own journey that fortunately or unfortunately, as tiring as it might be, you have to really work on putting yourself out there a lot more as the founders of an organization. And sometimes that does end up becoming a considerable part of your work. That's where the unfortunate part sort of comes in. But I feel like that's extremely important today because, like I mentioned, the access to information, even for a funder, is so much that it becomes very difficult for somebody to look through all of it and find, a particular organization. So I feel like putting some time and effort in that definitely helps.
Thank you so much. I think this is an unusual set of people to come on a panel on this topic. Thanks, Quest, for giving us the space to have this conversation today.
It's not time for lunch yet. Don't go.